Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Tom Agnew, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, man. Glad to be here.
You know, I was actually curious to hear more about Grace Church, but before we jump into that, how did service go yesterday? I know Mondays are generally a day of rest and recovery for most pastors, and sometimes the time off maybe is not so great because you're thinking about, well, shoot, I should have said this, or what if we did that, or, I don't know if you struggle with that, but I feel like a lot of pastors, will second guess some things, and which I totally understand. But how did service go yesterday?
Overall, I think this season, this new normal, whatever that has been, whatever you want to call that, has actually been kind of, it's gone pretty well. I think there is that tendency to over-evaluate your presence now. I mean, more so than I was. Although I'd say, as a pastor, I'm always thinking about what I could have said differently,
right,
whatever else. But it's one thing to think about, well, those words that most people are going to forget. But now there's a video out there,
right,
it's on public, and so there's a little bit of that unnerving place in my heart that says, okay, so there's tons of room for people to be critical if they really, really wanted to.
Yeah, well, that's the difficult thing too, is if people are just watching online that maybe have not come to your church in the past, is they don't have the context, they don't have the relationship,
right?
They don't have the history, the background, they don't have all of that. Now, are you guys new to, have you not recorded services in the past?
No, we just do our podcast. We offer our sermons through our podcast, but we don't do a full service or anything online.
I see.
At this point, and we will most likely still offer it at least for a season after this is over with. Of course, there's different people with different views on whether or not you should continue that or not, but we're still pressing through that and kind of praying about what would that look like for us down the road. But as a whole, it's went smoothly. We've had people jump in. God in His providence, one of our elder sons had to come home from college, and he does mass media as his major, and so he was able to set us up well with some good cameras and things like that. So as a whole, it fell at the right time for us. And
really?
So we're set up well for at least for the foreseeable future, and then we'll see what happens as far as how this unfolds.
So like yesterday, how are you doing it? Are you going in and doing are you preaching live through a video camera?
Yeah. There's been different mindsets on that. We have chosen not to pre-record for a lot of reasons. I think most of it is just my commitment to the best of my ability. Again, I don't think you can replace the gathering of the church. That's goes to some own theological convictions. But as a whole, I want to know that my people are going to do their best to try to be attentive at the same time. And so at least in some sense, I can say, okay, at 10:30, again, you can still watch it anytime you want to beyond that.
Right.
But as a whole, we have been finding most of our people have been staying pretty committed to 10:30, and so we're doing it live. Music's live, so it means that comes with possibilities of mistakes and whatever else. But I also feel like that's going to happen on Sunday morning regardless. So we're okay being just kind of a not perfect kind of church anyway. So we feel it kind of goes with our vibe.
Yeah, I love that. So have you found it more difficult to preach into a camera? It seems to me like it would be more difficult. Have you been able to adapt, or? I
think so. I mean, we have 7 or 8 people in the building on Sunday mornings with between our band and then a couple guys doing stuff back there and a couple of elders who participate in the service. And so having them spread out over this massive room, I'm saying massive, it's not a huge room, but it holds about 150 people.
Okay.
So we strategically put them there so I will make myself look at different people across the room. So just to try to pretend that there's people there, although that seems a little staged, but for me, it helps me going, I'm actually looking at people, praying for people.
Okay.
And I do think that, it's still weird. It feels weird because no one's there.
Right.
But I think as a whole, we're doing okay.
Yeah. How long have you been preaching?
Well, I've been in ministry for about 22 years altogether.
Okay.
And I've been in youth ministry, small group ministry, been preaching, but mostly preaching the last 12 or so years on and off.
That's what I was going to ask is, do you get nervous, say, on a Sunday morning when you're preaching before service or leading right up to, and do you get more or less nervous when you're preaching into a video camera?
Well, I think there's always that kind of nerves that you get.
You sense the responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Like
it's the responsibility aspect. It's not so much about getting up in front of people.
Okay.
It's strange. I would consider myself more of a grown-up introvert, but I've somehow or another adapted to more of an extroverted world. And so I'm much more comfortable just kind of jumping up and just doing whatever I need to do. Maybe that's just because 20 years will do that to you of ministry. But as a whole, I think that I don't want to say there's a lot of nerves other than just the weight of the responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
And so I would say that weight feels more significant now because I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is hoping that every word lands more.
Right.
Because this is the best we have to offer at this point, and trusting.
Sure.
And of course, that is, trusting the Spirit to work in people's lives and praying that people are being diligent to stay tuned in and whatever. So
yeah. Well, you're mentioning about introvert, extrovert. Maybe you didn't change from an introvert to an extrovert. Maybe this is like one of your strengths. I feel like I can think of a few really great preachers. And then even there's some speakers that are not preachers that are really great, and they're introverted people.
Yeah.
So I don't think like the fact that you're good or maybe even enjoy getting up and speaking or preaching, I don't think you ought to be an extrovert, to be good at that.
No.
Introverts might even have some advantage because they like to have some space to study and prepare and all of that.
To some degree. I mean, I'm married to a natural introvert. So if you saw us together, you would say, oh, no, gosh, you are way more extroverted than she is.
Okay.
So she's much more introverted, fine being by herself, has her small group of women that she's close to, and that's totally fine with her.
Okay, gotcha. So that's not you.
That's not me. I
see.
can spread myself out pretty thin relationship-wise, although I only trust... I tend to only trust. I mean, I trust most people, but there's certain levels of safety that comes in maybe a handful of guys that God has put in my life. So,
right. Yeah. Someone has mentioned that they were introverted but socially bold. I'm not sure who that was. And that's kind of stuck. That kind of makes sense.
It does make sense, and I think that might be somewhat accurate of kind of how I see myself.
Yeah. Now, what kind of feedback, more or less different, same, are you getting now as compared to when you guys are meeting in person? I mean, do you get feedback now via, say, a text or maybe a comment? I don't know if this is on YouTube or are you getting feedback from the congregation?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a Sunday morning kind of roll call kind of thing. Who all's here? Let's say whatever. One of my guys will typically do that just to see who all's in. But I mean, not like that's a big deal. But so most of it's just thanks, guys. We know you're doing your best.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of appreciation. I think the tendency is to try to be encouraging. So I'm thankful that my church is kind of wired that way. We don't make big deals out of small things. I think that's kind of the culture we've created there, or I think by God's grace has been created there. But I do think that the feedback has been, it's needed. There's that, and I think really it makes people want more to be together.
Yes,
and which I'm thankful is probably hopefully one of the benefits of this season is it shows people that this matters. Gathering together matters as a church.
Yeah, you really can't replace it. I mean, I have not had many Zoom calls, thank God, since this whole thing happened. But I mean, they're just not we've had our elder meetings via Zoom call because you have to. I mean, that's just what we've sort of needed to do for a couple of them there. But it's I don't know what I would equate. I would say I probably enjoy it 20%, of normal getting together in person. I mean, you just can't replace that in-personness.
Right.
Which I think, the virus one of the good things is, digital has been on its way for quite some time. I mean, we're already living in a very digital age.
Right.
So I think this helps us sort of make that extra hire or do the extra thing and, which is not all going to be wasted after the virus passes. But another great thing, I think that it's just showing everyone, even outside of churches, is just how community oriented we really are. Deep down, we can't do this by ourselves. We need people. We need friends. We need to be around some people sometimes. When you're stuck in your house too long, it's man, it's just not the way it was meant to be.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the things that we try to converse about is we try to downplay the whole extrovert introvert. That's been everyone wants to talk about. Oh man, this is every introvert's dream right now, right?
Right.
And we just really tried to say, look, okay, great. We all have personality types. That's perfect, great, and all. But we are still designed and I think wired to be with people.
Yes.
To some degree. I don't think that necessarily everyone's comfortable in the same size groups or the same kinds. Of again, speaking of my wife, I want her to be where she feels comfortable and she feels like she can trust the ladies there. And now she's the kind of person like me, she will she'll make a big deal about anyone who's in the room and try to make them feel comfortable. That's not her thing. She's not like withdrawn or anything.
Yeah.
But it's just it's one of those things where we try to downplay that because I think, like you said, this season should draw something into us about how we're wired to be with people and love people and be cared by people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the single one thing that I miss the most through this time is church. Because a lot of this other stuff can be replaced, or there's decent substitutes. I mean, shoot, I'm still coming to this office. I'm the only one in here, so I come. My life's not disrupted that much. But even hearing from other people, working from home is not that bad if you have some space. Now, our house is very small right now. We have 5 kids. It's not good to work from home. But like those are things I can stomach. There's no traffic out, which is awesome. Shoot, I don't mind not getting to go to a restaurant every couple of weeks. I think it's a lot harder to spend money right now in the virus, which has been great. Yeah. However, the single thing that I really just miss is church. It's like, and I don't know if I would have seen that, it's like, yeah, actually I probably would have in recent years, but it's 2-3 hours on a Sunday morning, a lot less if you're just kind of walking in and we're not serving or whatever. But man, I feel like that has landed on a lot of people is like, that's the one thing they want to get back into the soonest is like, we want to meet together for church.
I would agree. I think most of the people that we've been trying to really be good shepherds. Like, I think that's the thing that we're trying to like go back to and explore is like, okay, we don't have to offer every online opportunity, but our elders are being like really proactive, calling our members up, seeing how they're doing, especially our older members, trying to do old school ministry. I think there's a sense in which that might be really, really appropriate right now. Yeah. And everybody, young and old, we're like, I just can't wait till we get back together.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you mentioned some of the value in, say, 10:30 a.m., and you're preaching live, right? You're having an online service that's live at 10:30 a.m. Central on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
And of course, someone could watch it at 1 o'clock that afternoon or, that night or whatever, because it stays after it's out, right? And it stays out. Right. But you just mentioned seeing some value in doing it live, which I totally agree with. Just reading a couple of books recently on the Great Awakening and how preaching just took the land by storm. Right. Now they couldn't watch those sermons later on YouTube, like we can. But man, when you read some of those accounts, you get the sense that those people were going to show up in that church or on that hillside. Right. They were going to be there and they were not going to miss it. And sometimes they were there all day or late into the night. But they could have probably, read some transcripts or something later, but no, they wanted to be there in person, live, and so I think there's something to just having that sense of maybe even fellowship, like where people are coming together at the same time.
Yeah,
value there.
For better or worse, and this is we've tried to listen and learn to how other people are doing it, and I actually had a friend of mine in North Carolina that's part of our network that. They started out videotaping, and then he came back and goes, I just don't like it. And he went to more live. And he's like, for better or worse, we're going to go live. And so I think there's some of that movement, and I think I've had some people go do the exact opposite. And we're just, for us, it is, okay, this is the best that we can do. Yes. We feel like it's better for us instead of trying to overproduce it. So, and I also think that, like you said, I'm not as concerned about, and this may be contrary to what some folks will want to do, like, oh, we're going to reach so many people and whatever else. Just really not my goal. I know that sound may sound like, oh, you're not evangelistic. No, that's not it either. I just don't believe my preaching or the preaching of God's word is really much bigger than what is localized. So my people, it's for my people. Like, I preach sermons from the text that, one, hopefully being faithful to the text, but secondary is it's to a specific people. Yes. And so I have, with the kids and all, about 125 localized people that I'm thinking about every Sunday, mostly. Yes. Now, again, I want to be praying for, God to use it in unbelievers' lives, of course. But, someone comes in, we've had one or two comments saying, hey, wanted to kind of challenge something. And I'm like, okay, you're not part of my church. I'm like, hey, glad to have that conversation with you. Call me. We'll do it. But I just don't really have that as my main goal.
Yeah. Well, how are you guys? It sounds like you're doubling down on this personal ministry, and you're doing the online stuff too, and you're probably trying to do a great job at whatever you're doing. But it sounds like you have a passion for or focus on this personal ministry. How are you guys doing that? Because man, we found it difficult over this time.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there's lots of phone calls, texts going out. There is certainly what I've tried to do a couple of times is just like, just free for all, like Zoom calls, things like that. Anyone who wants to come in,
Whoever
pray together.
wants to join from
Right.
the church can join.
Yeah.
Is it specifically for prayer or just to talk or?
It's both and, you know. So there has, like, for instance, now on Wednesdays at noon, one of my deacons is leading a prayer time, and I'll show up for that. And if there's any major concerns, we'll talk about them, discuss them. But typically, it's pretty short. And we've done some, like I said, just kind of all church kind of things, and it's not tended really all that well because a lot of people just really don't feel very awkward being on Zoom call and people watching them, and
right.
But
which I can understand.
Right. So we're still ministering to people and do the best we can. And frankly, like, to whatever people's comfort level is, we'll go visit. I know that some people may not feel comfortable doing that, but again, we're not to the degree that we see our role as shepherds as essential, which I do.
Right.
We certainly can't gather on Sunday mornings, but if a couple says, hey, hey, come over and visit for a while, I have a no in-house policy as much as possible.
Okay. Yep. You might sit in the yard.
Yeah. Yeah, sit in the yard, sit in the backyard kind of thing. And again, keep it to, just a couple of people or whatever,
Yeah.
So we've done that. And we've had, like, for instance, we just had a gentleman die in our church during this time who had been suffering from Parkinson's disease for several years. And so it just turned out that this was what's going to happen, and him and his wife, and he was at home, hospice, so he was able to be at home. And it was a really long, rough period for the wife and for their daughters, who are both nurses. And he was a runner for 40 years, so his heart just wouldn't give out. And it was a really difficult time. So we just felt the need, as much as she was willing, and she was very willing to have us over, of course, sanitize everything, whatever, come and visit, and just pray for them.
Yeah.
And so again, you hear this talk about one another ministry. We so believe in that. But I also think, man, the shepherds have got to show up.
Right.
And so that's what we've been trying to do, is just as much as possible show up.
Yeah, that's great. Now, this fellow that passed away during this virus, sound like he attended your church?
Yeah, him and his wife had been there and he's, I think, 68 years old when he passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago.
So how did you handle, what I would think of as like your traditional role, getting involved here when there's a death, and how did you handle all of this during this time? All of that during this time? Yeah,
so we had talked 2 or 3 months ago, started getting some arrangements made with the wife and, with his wife, Betty, and wonderful couple. I mean, some of the most Jesus-loving people I've ever met in my life. And so we already kind of had some thoughts, processes there, and they chose cremation. So just to be upfront with that, and they've just chosen at this point to wait till do some kind of memorial after this is all said and done.
Okay.
And so but our thing was the best we could do is just be in a home as much as they're willing, as much as was safe.
Okay. Yep. But it wasn't like friends and family in the home. It was more or less just you guys, or did they have some sort of a close knit, small
So it's just
service or memorial or something? It just seems so sad for someone to pass away.
They've done none
right
of that yet.
now, and not have that support and the memorials and funerals, like those things there's a reason we do that. It's healing,
So as far as this particular situation, I've been there a couple of times when the kids were she has 2 daughters and a son who all have families, but none, like all the grandkids weren't able to be there because they were sick and things like that too. So it was just safety issues. And plus, again, trying to, accommodate the spirit of let's keep it small and keep it whatever.
Yeah.
So, we would show up. I mean, I would usually it's just one elder at a time. We would never have all of our elders show up because that was just, we didn't want to overwhelm anything.
Sure.
So it just we'd all kind of talk amongst ourselves, like, so who's going to go visit this week? And we try to get him there a couple times a week at least.
Yeah.
But I think when he actually passed away, we just obviously encouraged her to go spend some time away from home with her grandkids. And she'd been more or less a prisoner of their home for months because of just how long it took him to finally, pass. And so, and encourage her, like, obviously this is a difficult season. You do as you feel. We'll be available to whatever you want. But she had chosen herself. Like, he would want it to be simple.
I see.
He just wanted a gravesite anyway if it was all going to happen.
Yeah.
So he didn't really want much when this is all said and done. So,
I see. Yep.
But they did change, because of everything happened, they changed not to do a burial, but to do cremation at the last second.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah. I mean, those are the things where, man, you just got to adapt very quickly because
Yeah.
we're in such unprecedented times.
Sure.
And you still want to minister the best that you can to everyone.
Right.
Now, this focus on personal ministry during this time, has this been a focus of, is this kind of close to your heart in general? Has this been a focus of the church even before COVID-19, or is this something specifically when this hit? You guys are like, all right, well, here, we could focus a lot on online and kind of go in that route, or we could double down on the personal ministry. We're going to double down on personal ministry. Like, how did you get to that?
I am happy to say that this has been part of our culture since the
Okay.
beginning. We have always put a big high priority on being family, and not at the, obviously we've grown as a family. God has brought some wonderful families into our church. So we started with like around 30 people and everything when we started 4 years ago, and God has more than quadrupled that at this point, as far as the amount of families in there. So we've grown, and we've been a family that wants to grow. That's kind of our idea is be a family that wants to grow. Mm-hmm. And so in that we've not, and this is going to be, again, a little contrary to probably normal thought, we don't put a lot of emphasis on small groups. We encourage men's and women's small groups, and we have several of them, but we have done a really more focused on getting, like we went back to more of a Sunday school model, which is kind of strange. Again, in my world, especially the Acts 29 world, that's kind of really an anomaly. Mm-hmm. But we kind of said that we wanted to have the church together, cross age ranges together, and it's created a family, and I think our people enjoy that. And so I think it was easy for us, as much as this season can be easy, so being clear about that. I think it was a natural fit for us to say, we know what we need to do here, and we don't. We definitely want to have an online presence on Sundays. Mm-hmm. Certainly do. My wife does a Zoom women's Bible study on Wednesday nights, and then a couple other things here and there. Our elders, of course, do Zoom, but we've encouraged our DNA groups, which is our men's and women's groups, to do Zoom or some other medium to gather.
Yep.
But,
interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear more about. So let's just outside of COVID-19, outside of this whole virus thing. Mm-hmm. You would have a Sunday morning service at 10:30. Mm-hmm. Before that, you're going to have some sort of Sunday school.
Right.
And let's come back to the Sunday school. Do you have Sunday night or Wednesday night services?
As of right now, no. We just moved into a church building back in November, right before Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we were in a school. So the part of that was just
wow. You were moving in and out every Sunday morning?
Yeah.
You just got into your own church in November?
Yes.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes.
And then this hit, huh?
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, like this was God's gift to us and grace to us, because we've not had to worry about like trying to find a place to do a worship service from and to do all that other stuff. So again, I understand why some people have to pre-record, because it just makes sense.
Right. Isn't it so nice to have your own building now?
It is.
Oh, my goodness.
So we're leasing it from another church that had kind of died and has been dying. And so we love that church to death. And their young pastor has been so wonderful to us and allows us to have office space there.
Do they still meet too? Just different times?
So here's that's a whole story about myself, and happy to go there as far as you want to. But this church had dwindled down to about 10 people or so, 12 people, mostly senior adults who just needed to be loved. And they hired a 28-year-old pastor. And me and that 28-year pastor got to know each other. He reached out to me when he got to town, realized that we had a lot in common, and we enjoyed being around each other. And then we just, he worked bivocationally in a school system there as well. And as we began to pray for one another and get other pastors involved, he was like, finally one day we're like, why don't you guys we got this 10,000 square foot building, and I'd hate for it. And it was kind of falling into disrepair. Still needs a lot of work on it. Mm-hmm. Why don't we think about you guys just moving in? You use one side of the building, we not, and we'll kind of get our times lined up. And so as far as now is concerned, they meet in the fellowship hall on the other end of the building. We have the main worship area. And we typically basically have all the classes. Like they don't really use any classes either. So that's been a really neat, God-glorifying relationship. And they're Wesleyan, so it's a completely different world than us. But God's been gracious to us. And,
interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So they're actually meeting on Sunday mornings too. It's just in the fellowship hall.
Yep.
Wow, that's really great.
Yep.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about no small groups or community groups.
Well,
What's your thought process there?
Yeah, so, I mean, it really wasn't necessarily a desire not to do it, because the church that was our sending church, it was in Nolensville, I was kind of heading up the small group ministry over there and our community groups. And so we had, obviously couples and kids and everything. And we're a single staff church. I'm the only staff member except for a part-time worship leader. And we have been blessed with a wonderful team of deacons and deaconesses in our church who are more or less de facto staff members, and they function that way, and they've been so good about just running their ministries.
Yep.
And continue to grow in that. But as we began to grow, we're like, we didn't have a big vision to say, we just wanted to grow this staff team up and whatever else. And so we did the whole small groups. We did what we called them grace groups we tried them for about a year, and we retooled them, and we tried them again for another year. And then we came back and we're like, okay, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And frankly, we just sat down with a lot of our wives, and the wives was that, we like this, but it feels like there's more pressure to do this. Because by the time you get kids settled down and eating dinner and stuff like that, like we might get 20 minutes or 30 minutes of meaningful conversation with one another.
Yeah.
And so we just said, you know what? We went back to saying, why don't we do a Sunday morning Bible study time? Have kids instruction during that time, rotate leaders in and out of that so they can get some adult time as well. We started that model, and then we said, let's just get men's and women's groups. We have about, I think, 8 or 9 groups total. And we went to them and said, hey, why don't you lead a women's group and a men's group? And we just tell them, hey, like, don't meet on the same nights. We rotate everybody out.
Okay.
Meet as often as you want. If you want, no less than every 2 weeks, but most of them meet every week.
Okay.
And they, that way, there's a dad at home to watch the kids, and it encourages dad's discipleship, and there's a mom at home. So it kind of goes both ways, and it's a way to minister and create family life that way too.
Interesting. And are these men and women's groups meeting at church or meeting in each other's homes?
Homes, cafes, just kind of really whatever they feel like. We don't really put a lot of restrictions on that. I'd say it's a mixture of both.
Sure, yeah. When I thought you mentioned something about scheduling. It sounded like you had to kind of schedule these groups around.
We just told them don't schedule on top of one another.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
that we wouldn't have any issues of.
Yeah, then you don't have to get a babysitter because the dad's out with the men's group and the mom's out with the women's group. Then that makes total sense. Yeah. How is that response? Are you finding
we're having more participation?
Okay.
We have more people. I mean, overall, as far as our adults, we probably have somewhere around 70 to 75% of our adults in a small group. And then we have a good representation of our Sunday morning Bible Sunday morning time. Like we probably have 80% of our people there for Sunday morning
show
Bible.
up for Sunday school.
Yeah, for kids and everything. Yeah.
We had Sunday school as well, just up until the beginning of the year when we switched to 2 services, but we've called them seminars.
Yeah. Well, and we kind of have the same thing. So we don't do that's
but it's kind of Sunday school.
Yeah. And so for us, like what we decided to do was we have one adult class right now, just one adult class because of just the way space had worked out for us. We were hoping to expand that down the road. And we have multiple kids classes at different age groups and stuff. We have quite a good, our volunteers in our children's ministry have done a fantastic job. The adult class is more or less seminar based. So we just go through like 8 weeks on this or 12 weeks on that. And we only do it fall and spring, and we take a break for the summer.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay. So this is not a 52 weeks a year thing?
No, we just thought we give all of our teachers a break during the summer because people are traveling.
Okay.
We still maintain our our DNA groups or our men's and women's groups during that time as much as possible. But we just really have embraced more of a less programmatic model, and not that everything is programmed to some degree, but we've just chosen to say, again, focus on the family, the church, the family, and we'll do bigger things and bigger congregational things during the summer, like prayer groups, cookouts, things like that.
Yep, that's great. Yeah. What do you think are some of the components behind a better participation? It sounds like more energy for these men and women's groups versus just small groups, traditional small groups. Is it it's easier because there's no kids there? Is it there's something about the dynamic of just women being with women, men being with men, and that's just easier to establish maybe a connection or rapport? Like, what do you think is behind what sounds like a better engagement with the men's and women's groups and what you had with the small group?
Well, I think, some of it has to do with the fact that you're always going to have to deal with how do you minister to children and that obligation. So for us, we include children in our worship service. We don't we don't have, other than nursery, we don't really do a lot for children during our service. And so that's a little bit of that conviction of bring the kids in and be okay with the mess and the noise and whatnot. But we found that in a group, it felt a little bit too hard for families to be like, hey, while they're feeding a child, trying to have a conversation and those kinds of things. I do think that was part of it, but I also think that there's a good book that Mark's put out a few years ago called a compelling community, and I'd recommend that to anyone. And it just really kind of challenged some of my assumptions about what community is in the church, and frankly, whose responsibility it is to produce community. And I feel like sometimes as a pastor, I've taken too much responsibility trying to produce community. And so though we do encourage people to find a group, we don't really make it a first tier type of responsibility. So we feel like the first tier is the whole church. And so we try to create, we have a second Sunday fellowship. Now that we were in a building, of course that's on pause now, but it would be a fellowship and prayer time. Of course, we coordinate that also with our members' meetings. We do 4 times a year, things like that. So we're of that ilk of high emphasis on the whole congregation, less emphasis on the parts of the congregation.
Yes.
Although Sunday school would meet some of that itself.
Sure, that makes sense. So on a Sunday morning, no kids' church necessarily. You have something for the little ones, nursery. But during the Sunday school hour, you do have classes. You have one class for the adults, and then you have or varying classes for the kids, and it sounded like?
Oh, yeah, we do.
Okay.
I think right now we have 5 breakdowns for our kids, and then we have a youth class.
Okay.
And stuff like that. So I think overall, and again, the teachers do a fantastic job. We have 5 classrooms for them, and I think they spread out among those for nursery all the way up to 5th grade.
Yep.
And then we have what we call youth is really more or less middle school, because that's where most of our kids are. And we really try to encourage our high schoolers to do more stuff with young adults. And maybe that'll change down the road. Right now, it's just more of a necessity, because having one class for youth and having a good crop of middle schoolers, but not that many high schoolers, we've just encouraged our high schoolers to say, this is an opportunity for you to be an adult or start figuring out what adulthood looks like. So come on in, and more or less they're pretty plugged into that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And for context for the listeners, Grace Church is in Smyrna, Tennessee, SMYR, Smyrna, Tennessee, maybe 20 minutes, would you say, east of Nashville?
Yeah.
Definitely part of the Nashville kind of metroplex.
I would say right between, easiest way to say is right about halfway between Murfreesboro and Nashville.
Right. Yeah, and Smyrna has a good airport, actually. Now, unfortunately, this was since we lived in Nashville. I don't know what year this was. It was a couple years. The Blue Angels were practicing. And I don't know what they were doing at the airport, but one of the jets went down and took the pilot's life.
Yeah, he did. I don't know all the details about that, how there's been different rumors about what happened, but I think the pilot made the choice to crash the plane because of otherwise there would have been more people at risk.
Right.
And so he put it on the ground and risked his own life because of what was happening. And so, yeah.
I mean, those jets all have, what do you call it? Expulsion, catapulsion. Right. What's it called? Ejection seat.
Ejection seat, yes.
Big fan of the movie Top Gun. And it happens a few times in that movie.
Yes.
I mean, those jets have that, so he could have ejected himself, but chose to steer the plane away from some of the buildings and save others' lives. So, yeah, Smyrna.
Yeah, because if he had not done that, then who knows where that thing would have landed and how many. I mean, it's still a pretty dense area, homes everywhere.
Oh, so, yeah. I mean, if that thing hits an apartment building and there's jet fuel in there, I mean, now it's not just, who does the plane hit? It's the explosion, and then you have a fire, and I mean, you could. Yeah. That can be devastating.
That's right.
Grace Church. Did you say that you were a plant out of a church from Nolensville?
That's right.
And Grace Church has been around for 4 years. I'd like to hear more about how Grace Church was begat.
Okay. Well, so in 2008, my wife and I came in view of a call. Backstory on that, we had been in North Carolina and had attempted to plant a church in North Carolina, and God in His grace showed some deep pockets of immaturity in my part, and I wasn't ready for that. But God used some men in that church, in that area, and some churches that just mentored and loved my wife and I well during that time. And so while we were kind of mending our wounds and whatnot, we took a call to a church in the South Nashville area. I'd love to say that was a fairy tale moment, but it wasn't. It was a traditional church that was just going through some transitions, and so. Within 6 months, that church had went through a pretty rough time, and a group of people were pulled out and started a church in Nolensville called Providence Baptist Church, and I was part of that initial team of pastors. There was 3 of us, And through lots of pains and mistakes, and we used to still jokingly say among the three of us, because we're still really good friends, if we could have messed this up, we certainly tried. And I think that's the
Nolensville Church?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And but God in His grace, after about 2 years, got our feet under us. God began to grow the church and grew up to a few hundred people. And then we just always felt like part of that process was God showing us the center. One, I think that there was some really theological things that were going to happen in our lives, even though we were kind of all there from using the word reformed kind of perspective. But I don't think we really understood what that looked like in terms of the congregation. So we began to try to grow a healthy church and utilize every resource we possibly could to grow that. And God in His mercy showed us, helped us lead step by step. We always wanted to be a church that planted another church. And about 7 years into that church, I was one of the associate. So of the three of us, we were all really good friends. The lead pastor is one of my best friends. His name's Joe. Shout out to Joe Seagal and John Whitenack at Providence.
Joe Seagal?
Gross Steagal.
Okay. And then, Joe Steagal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And John Whitenack, we were the three amigos. That's what he used to call us.
Okay.
Really good friends. Love those brothers to death. And we going through a rough time in that patch. We asked Joe was the best choice to be the lead pastor, even though we were kind of a pastoral team. But we just became really good close friends, and we saw a lot of difficult times during that time, those first 2 or 3 years.
Now, just to be clear, it was you three guys had started this church, or kind of branched off from the other church south of Nashville to launch this church in Nolensville.
Right.
And it was you three guys.
Right.
Now, is it over this time that some of the Reformed theology is working in your heart, did you mention? Or
Well, we were all in different places.
Okay.
So I would definitely say we were all very much gospel-centered and Christ-centered as far as that's concerned. I was probably a little further down the road from a reform perspective and convictions than some of them were. But even then, I was kind of, if you ever heard the word cage stage Calvinist, I was kind of a mad, angry guy that wanted to make sure everyone. So just putting all my chips on the table, man.
Right. Yeah.
But God humbled me through a lot of things and brought some really good friends to that church start. Anyway, that church grew up and to a very healthy, and still is a very healthy church there in Nolensville. And about 7 years in, I was just sitting in my office one day, and I had been thinking, like, okay, is it time to plant a church? And I was living in Smyrna already. We were drawing a lot of people from Smyrna over there, so we were like, okay, we were very committed to being a local church, and so Joe walks in my office, and just out of nowhere, after me and my wife had even had conversations just a few weeks before, and I said to her, when Joe Stegall has the idea, I said, it'll be time to plant, because he's that's kind of how it works. Not that necessarily he has to be the idea guy. It's just, when he's behind it, what's behind it. So Joe came in my office, and he said, I think it's time for us to start thinking about planting a church in Smyrna. And, what would you think about doing that? And I said, wow, I've been kind of praying about that already.
Okay.
And so God kind of confirmed that, and we began having some early conversations. That was the spring of like 2005, I think, or 2015, excuse me.
Okay, yeah.
And so that began a long process, and he said, we want to send you out the good team, we want to resource you. And so I listed off like 11 families I would love to see go with us, and by God's grace, of those 11 families, I think 9 came with us.
Oh, wow.
And we took about 6 months, got our stuff kind of up and going, and launched off with our own worship service in January of 2016.
January of 16. So 4 years this January, right?
Yeah, 4 years this past January.
Congratulations.
That's right. So,
a lot of church plants don't make it. I don't know what the stats are, but
yeah,
they're not great, right?
They're not great. And I think that was part of the conviction was, unless we were planted by a church, and that church was going to really be invested in all levels. We just felt like that was going to be the best way to plant a church. I mean, we know a lot of guys. I did the whole parachute thing into Raleigh area, and saw I was not geared for that. I wasn't really tooled for that kind of call. But this was more of, hey, let's just plant some people there and get a presence there, and then God in His grace just began to kind of grow it slowly.
Were the people that started to come over from some of your first people from the other church, were they mostly people that were in Smyrna area or close to, or
More or
not
less, yeah.
necessarily? Okay.
I think of that initial group of the 9 families, I think 7 of them lived in either Smyrna or Laverne area.
I see.
And
Yeah.
then we had a couple from Murfreesboro and a couple from Antioch that were driving down.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When we moved to Nashville in 2014, I looked at a house in Laverne.
Oh, yeah.
We wound up in Mount Juliet. Now we live just south of Nashville. But
Right.
so yeah, I'm familiar.
Mhm.
Do you still get active support? It sounds like you have a lot of back and forth with Joe and who was the name of the other fellow you mentioned?
John.
Joe and John.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get active support from that church in Nolensville still, or are you mostly out on your own now?
As far as financially on our own, we don't have any support from them other than little minor things here and there that come along. Like, for instance, they just replaced their copier and everything, and they went ahead and bought the other copier out from its lease and said, "Hey, this is yours. It's a gift from the church."
Yeah.
So we actually have not even moved that copier over here because it all kind of happened about the same time this stuff happened. Started kind of transpiring. So we still have yet to move that copier to the building.
Yeah.
But it's sitting in their building ready for us to come pick it up. It's a nice big deal for us to use, and so they still do like things like that.
Sure. Okay.
But as a whole, there's no financial.
You're not part of a board or any kind of central governing body or anything like that. You're your own church.
We are our own autonomous church. Yes.
Now, when you said, did you say Raleigh, North Carolina?
That's right.
And when you mentioned parachuting in, I guess that's what it sounds like, where you were new to Raleigh, you weren't from there, and just kind of arrived and planted a church. Is it?
Yes, more or less.
Or worked at
So
a church.
the short story of that is I was finishing up seminary in the Louisville area. I was living in Lexington. My wife and I had just been married for a while, and I'd sensed a call to plant it, during that time. But again, part of just the whole journey was I was kind of running from some stuff, running from, didn't really want to be at the church I was in, so I was kind of using that as an excuse to leave. And my wife is so good and faithful; she just followed me, and probably should have been more vocal at that time.
Sure.
So I'm from Virginia originally.
Okay.
And I've always had this love for Virginia, North Carolina area, and so I said I really feel like the God I feel word feel there. I want to plant a church in the Raleigh area, like the environment, the ethos there. And so we originally were talking through the Baptist convention there about planting on the east side of Raleigh. And by the time we got to Raleigh, we were helping a church plant that was struggling in the Chapel Hill area, and decided to go take that work up.
I see.
And that we loved the Chapel Hill area. It was great, beautiful, wonderful university town. Just, man, we loved it there. Bought a house, lived there for a couple years. But it became clear that, at least at that point, planting was not going to be something that I needed to do, and there were some things that I really wanted to work on in my life. Ministry was an idol for me, big time identity issue for me. And so we stepped away from it, helped us back in high school ministry in a larger Baptist church in the Raleigh area. I was in management for Harris Teeter, a grocery store chain there in the area. And then we did kind of for a while, just kind of use it as a ramp up to kind of maybe one day pursue ministry in the church again.
I see.
And that's how we ended up back in Nashville.
I see. Interesting. So you're 4 years in at Grace Church. It was a complete fresh church plant. You had the advantage of having a sending church, which it sounds like was pretty well a prerequisite for you. That needed to you wanted that to be true for you to. But you made it. Sounds like you made it, and sounds like you're flourishing.
Yeah.
What would be some of the? What would you? I mean, ultimately, you'd have to attribute that obviously to the grace of God.
Oh,
but what do you
absolutely.
think were some of the things that you didn't totally screw up that contributed to making it and flourishing? It sounds like.
I think and again, I don't want there's so much you can say about this. You learn a lot when you've been through the fire, and I don't know that I had been through the fire when we first moved to North Carolina, and didn't have the relational surrounding around me when we went down there that would have allowed us to thrive in that situation anyway, until we got into that other church after we had kind of shut the church plant down. Coming here, I think part of the way we talked about the new plant, the one I'm in now, it's 4 years old, was, and even the pastors of the sending church, Providence, said it was just it was not an option to let the church fail.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just that vocal nature to the members of that church. We're not going to let them fail, and we were not going to let Tom be alone.
Mm-hmm.
They sent me out with some of the best people possible. 2 of the men who were on our initial leadership team of 4 are now elders in the church and have become good brothers in the church. We've just added our 4th elder, the one who got me connected to you, Justin. He's working through our elder process. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's a elder candidate, and so we'll install him. Well, I guess whenever we get back together again.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So
shout out to Justin Long.
There you go. So Justin has been a great addition to our team. Got a good temperament, and so I think as far as making it successful and using that word very generously, it is we've tried to keep the main thing, and that is Christ and His Word, the ordinary means of grace, kind of a Puritan idea of gathering the church, focusing on preaching of the Word, the sacraments, and being a body of Christ that is committed to one another, and God will grow that, and He has. And so by keeping the main thing, it's amazing how many other things don't become a big deal anymore. Such as the small. For me, I felt a lot of guilt for not being in the church that could pull off a great community group ministry, great children's ministry and a great youth ministry, and we didn't blow up to 300 in the first year and whatever else. But I think for us, we kind of came back saying it's not about numbers, it's not about programs. And so I think the first point of success was for me, at least it's really been the only metric is now 4 years in, I think we're still operating by the same mentality. Yeah. And God's still growing us slowly but surely, and we're okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. What was the attendance of the church in Nolensville when you guys planted? It sounded like you said about 9 families went with you. What was the attendance total before Grace Church planted?
I think around 300 or so. Okay. 280, 300 as far as average Sunday was concerned.
Okay, so 280, 300 and what, 40 people broke off? 30, 40?
Yeah, I think with kids and everything, with those initial families, of those so we had about, first Sunday about 11 families, but 9 of them came from Providence initially. And so they probably sent us out with about 35 with kids and everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was adults and kids and everything.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I've heard 40 is sort of a good number, like at least 40. I have no idea if that's a thing or not, but you kind of want, if you're going to plant, you want about 40, give or take.
Yeah, and that's about what we had. The first Sunday, I think we had like 65 people there, but then we probably settled in around 45 or so as far as adults and kids and everything. And then by the end of the first year, I think we were pushing 60 as far as average attendance is concerned. And so again, it's a slow growth.
Yep. Yeah. And I see Grace Church is an Acts 29 church, correct?
Right.
Was the church in Nolensville also?
No.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And have you found that to be helpful as a planting church?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I love my brothers in Acts 29. I'd say that for me, that was like a second tier commitment for me. It was I'm a Baptist. Instead, it comes with a lot of baggage in a lot of ways. But my Baptist brothers have been so good about being committed to church planting and resourcing and things like that. And Providence is a very strong Southern Baptist church. But
that was the church in Nolensville.
That was a church in Nolensville. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so we are as well still connected to the Southern Baptist Convention as well, Tennessee Baptist Convention. But we just really sense that from a sense of, I hate to use the word tribe, but there were some brothers that I knew here in the local area, Jeremy Rose from Access Church, and back in the day, Shane, who was part of the network back then, Shane from Resonate Church, and a few other guys I just become really good friends with, and I'd see them once a month, and I just felt like that was a group of guys that were going to champion me. They were going to make sure that they checked in on me. That if there's one metric that seems to be common about church plants lasting is the health of the pastor.
Interesting.
And so those guys were committed to making sure that, staying with me and checking in on me, and we were at least together once a month, and, how could we, it wasn't even about really resourcing. It was about just friendship.
Yep.
And so Acts 29, I felt like brought that friendship component to the play.
Yeah. That's I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you back to what I'd love to know, because this is the first time we've met. So, have you always known you wanted to be a pastor? How did you come to this conclusion?
Wow.
And even, I mean, it sounded like maybe you might have a different theological viewpoint on some things, and maybe you had at some point in the past.
Sure.
Could you just talk more about? I'd love to hear what got you to this point. What got you into ministry to begin with?
Yeah. So church, just the short answer, I came to Christ when I was like 8 years old, but my parents had a difficult marriage, and so we moved around a lot, and they divorced, and so on and so forth. And so church didn't really become serious for me again until I was like in high school.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Virginia, right outside of Roanoke, Virginia. So Smith Mountain Lake area, if anyone's familiar with that area. And we started going to this really small independent Baptist church, fundamentalist Baptist church. It was, that's all I ever knew. And there was a point after I graduated high school where I was like, I really wanted to grow in my faith. God would begin using His Word in my life. So I've had this string of grocery store management opportunities I've had because I didn't go to college right away after high school. Want to just work and play and just be a big kid is all I wanted to do. And so, but there was this drive between the store I was managing and on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I would stop often and just open my Bible. Didn't know what I was reading, honestly, half the time, but God just used the Word to begin to kind of draw my heart to be more serious about studying His Word. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up leaving that little church my family was part of and going to a pretty established downtown church in Roanoke. And, that was the first time I really kind of been introduced to some theology, and it wasn't, at that point, it wasn't Reformed theology at all. It's just really good baseline evangelical Baptist theology. Solid, I would say, faithful. And the youth pastor there, and he also was in charge of the college ministry since I was in the college ministry, technically, even though I wasn't in college. Him and his wife just began to mentor me and love me and care for me. And so that ended up leading me to go to college in East Tennessee, at a small Baptist college there called Carson Newman College. And then he then invited me to come back and be an intern one summer. And I was like, okay, what does it look like I honestly didn't understand how church worked. I didn't know, do you actually get paid for your job? Yeah. Here's a big church that has like 18 ministers on it. And I was like, do you actually get paid to do what you're doing? And he's like, yeah. He said, you'll be an intern. You'll be paid far less, but you'll be right. But went back and served in the student ministry, did camps and did all kinds of things. And I just really loved being in the local church. I loved being with people. And you talk about that person-to-person ministry. I loved that I could, at least in this particular church, because it was a larger church, I could walk in on a Sunday or during the week, and I would know people going to be in the Family Life Center, and I would just sit down with some of my youth and college kids and just love and care for them. And I was very green about where I understood the Bible, knew Jesus, I understood the gospel, but that was about as much as I had at the time. Okay. But God began to use that and some very liberal professors at my college to shape me to really try to go, I need to really understand this. This is interesting. God used that in my life. And so by the time I got done with college, I had moved from a major in education and even law enforcement. I was kind of looking at those degrees, and I went to being a major in religion and philosophy, which will get you nothing on the market from a vocational standpoint. Yeah, so graduated there with that degree, those two degrees. I mean, with a major in both those. And then had already been working in a couple churches, one here in Nashville, Two Rivers Baptist Church. We've served on staff there in their student ministry for a couple of years, and so God began to use those experiences to say, I want you giving your life to local church ministry. At the time, mostly student ministry focused, but God began to shape and show me that I wasn't like ministry in the local church isn't defined by age group. It's defined about the local body. And again, went to Southern Seminary up in Louisville. And that was, again, God used all those things. But as associate pastor outside of Lexington in the church in the Lexington area, trying to pare it down to like where it's not so, muddled down in details. But God just really showed me what it meant to be in the local church, loving people. I've never really been that drawn to trying to do the big thing, although I've been a part of some larger churches. Sure. Just be with people and love people where they are and try to teach them the Word of God. And then through time, God gave me a seriousness about Reformed theology began to kind of take root in my life at the end of college. but I didn't really know what it was.
This is a college in Knoxville?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I was kind of part of that. I would consider myself part of that young, restless, and reform crowd. So Passion Ministries and One Day and John Piper and, for better or worse, Louis Giglio and some of those guys, Southern Seminary. They were all kind of part of the what people would call the young, restless, and reform, contributed to that. And I was more or less like, card carrying member of that, I guess.
Okay. And what year would have this been? Roughly, give or take?
That would have been, I was in college in 98 through 2001.
Okay.
And so I was kind of right in the middle of that whole movement.
Okay. That was a while ago.
It
Dang.
was. Almost, it's 20 years.
20 years ago. That's something. So I guess I'm surprised by, now in 98 to 2001, over that period of time, there was not, the young, restless, and reform movement wasn't put in those terms yet, right?
No,
that wasn't
that
until...
was Colin.
And Colin Hansen. And that would have been, when would have that been? Sometime between 2010 and 2015, right?
He wrote the book in the early, right after 2010. I can't remember exactly the year, but he was kind of doing, because he would put himself in that category, and he was just more or less using some sociological like markers of what would mark this new movement towards, we call it New Calvinism, Reformed theology, so on and so forth. And who are the major players in that? Southern Seminary was one. John Piper was one. Passion, in a weird sense, was because of the music that was more Christ-centered. So I think that kind of marked a lot of that tribe that kind of began to form. And
Okay. Okay, so it wasn't couched in those terms back in 2000, but that's basically what it was. In hindsight, you're saying that's what it was. Now, you're not saying, there's not a book. Colin didn't write a book on that, did he? I thought he wrote an article.
No, it's a book.
You think it's a book?
Yeah, it's a book. I have it on my shelf.
Young, Restless, and Reformed.
Yep. It's a whole book. Yeah, he wrote an article in if I'm
read
not
the
mistaken.
article.
Yeah, it was in Christianity Today.
I think so. Yeah.
And then there was a whole book that went around.
I didn't realize there was a whole book. Fascinating.
Yeah. Don't hold me to that. I'm pretty sure I have a book on that. I'll go home now and look and see.
Yeah, well, shoot me a text later.
Sure.
I've just never, I didn't know that. So anyhow, back to 2000. That's about when your theology started to shift a little bit.
Yeah, so, I had some friends. We were in campus ministries and had some friends introduce me to John MacArthur, Johnny Mac, like we call him, and Alistair Begg, and some of these guys who are really committed to expository preaching. Of course, there's differences among even that group of people, but begin to say, I really want to be serious about like the Word and let the Word drive my doctrine and understanding of the church and mission. And again, I was in this more moderate, very flubby Baptist, liberal arts Baptist college that didn't have, these guys, everyone's kind of formulating their opinions and their understandings. And so that was a place where it was really formative. R.C. Sproul was a big one factor in that for me as well. And so just listening to these guys really helped me shape my understanding of the sovereignty of God, the sola scriptura, sola scriptura, excuse me, faith alone, grace alone, that kind of stuff. Those kinds of things were really began to kind of be put in place, although I wouldn't necessarily have used the word Calvinism at the time or even Reformed theology. I think those are still very new terms for me.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, up there on the second shelf is Grace Unknown by R.C. Sproul.
Oh, yes.
And, man, if there was a theologian that I could have the opportunity to meet that was alive in my lifetime, it'd be R.C. Sproul. Very, very instrumental.
Yeah.
When we moved to Nashville in 2014, we were going to Refuge Church in Mount Juliet. It was a very small church and had just been a recent plant. Yeah. And the pastor there, Daniel, I remember talking to him the first time, and we were at Cracker Barrel in Mount Juliet. And of course, we didn't know anyone in Nashville, and we'd come down for a week, a few months prior before we moved and made sure that during the week we were going to catch 2 weekends. So we visited as many churches as possible. And we just liked the way they were doing ministry there. We liked the way they seemed to be focused on expository preaching, and we were just drawn to how their MO and everything of the church. And however, I was warned. I grew up being warned about those Calvinists.
That's right.
You got to stay away from those Calvinists. Those Calvinists are, they're nutty guys. It's some crazy stuff they're into. And so I guess I never took a I guess I always kind of took their word for it, to be honest. Like I never
Right.
kind of dug into it myself.
Right.
So I was okay, staying away from those crazy Calvinists. And so
Until
we
you
moved
meet one.
until you meet one. So we
Right.
moved to Nashville, started attending this church, which was Reformed.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor Daniel, he was very patient, very gracious. And so I remember being at Cracker Barrel one time with him, and I was just like, all right, well here, we like the fruit, but we disagree with the root.
Right.
And so we're like, all right, we'd love to actually, if you have us, we'd love to attend your church and be a part of it, and even become a member, and on all of these types of things, but. I just want you to know on the outset that I disagree with the Calvinist thing.
Right.
And so, he was very patient, and I started to learn more about what this is, because I didn't really know what they believe. I just knew to stay away from those doggone Calvinists.
Right.
And it was about a year. It was about a year journey, and reading Knowledge of the Holy. Is that the book? Knowledge of the Holy?
Yes.
Yeah, Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer, but Grace Unknown by R.C. Sproul. That was very instrumental. And of course, reading the scripture and trying to make some of those verses go away. Trying to explain, I was coming up for, look, I didn't particularly care to change my viewpoint on some of these things. I was 30 years old. Like I knew all this stuff. I don't, and so I'm battling it pretty hard at this point. And, I can't seem to make it go away, basically, and started reading Grace Unknown by R.C. Sproul. Oh, man. I get teary-eyed just talking about it now because, R.C. was instrumental with helping me to see that there is man-centered theology and there's God-centered theology. Now, this doesn't make really any sense in the Christian religion to have a man-centered theology. Like that's not, you can't tell me that exists, but it does exist.
It does exist. Amen.
So reading that book and and I'm not saying that a Arminian theology is man-centered, but there are theologies that are man-centered, and there's ways of doing things, there's mindsets, there's philosophies, there's thought processes that are extremely man-centered in the Christian religion, which it's very unfortunate. Yeah. So, reading that book was very instrumental. And July 26, 2015, took about a year and a couple of months. My wife and I were on the back patio at a condo in Florida. We were on vacation. I was smoking a cigar, and she looked at me and said, I think we believe this now. And she said it first. I was like, yeah, we do. And so I guess that opened up, for me, it was like seeing around a corner I'd never seen before.
Right.
It opened up this whole view of God that I was not familiar with. And it really kind of wrecked my life, man. It really changed me. Yeah. A Christian before, and have lots of friends, all my family that would disagree with me on some of these viewpoints.
Sure.
I'm totally fine with that. Most of them much better believers than I, but that particular view of God, seemed to make sense with what the scripture was saying, and it was very, very helpful. I was very eager to learn more about that God.
Yeah.
So
it does. I'm like you. I'm careful to say. I don't ever want to say that anyone who's not Calvinist is not a Christian, because that's certainly not true. We believe in one faith, one Lord, one baptism. Ephesians 4. We get it, right? But it does sometimes feel like you are discovering an entirely new God in some way.
Yeah.
I know that sounds really like that's at least that's what it was for me.
Yes.
And, you begin to kind of soften and even stand off the rough edges of that, again, that cage state of Calvinism that you begin with. But I do think it's humbling. It brings you back into real honest conversations with yourself about who you really are and who God really is. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, I said to my church even yesterday in our service, that good doctrine leads to good devotion. Of course, I'm trying to pair that off of, you've probably heard of Doctrine and Devotion podcast, but, that's true, though. There is a doctrine that is only good so much as it leads to devotion. It's like we're loved by God and we love God. If it doesn't do those things and it doesn't humble us to lead towards repentance and faith and joy, and joy in the midst of difficult circumstances,
Yes.
it's not good doctrine. It's
Absolutely, 100% agree. You know, Ray's wrote the book. I think it's just called. I had it. Well, it's right there behind your right shoulder. The Gospel by Ray
yes.
Ortlund, and that book talks a lot about gospel doctrine leading to gospel culture.
That's right.
And he's mentioned before being cautious. Now, let's put it this way. I have been told there are very grouchy, reformed people that exist in this world, and so I'll take their word for it. I've not experienced a whole lot of many, but I could you can tell, you can tell someone, by your fruits you shall know them. Right. So if someone, I guess there is such a thing as hyper Calvinism.
Sure.
And from what I can understand of hyper Calvinism, there's not a lot there that I would want really any part of. No. But the idea that God moves first in our salvation and that we were dead without Him saving us, opens up a whole new theology, quite frankly.
It does, and I think I'm like you. I have not seen this angry Calvinistic mob out there that just wants to condemn people to hell, which is kind of what tends to be the straw man that gets built about Calvinists. I do think there are guys out there, and I think a lot of times, initially at least, there is, and it depends on who you cut your teeth on a little bit, who tend to have this like they feel like it's their mission to make sure everyone becomes a Calvinist.
Right.
And so I think there is some of those out there. I don't think there's as many out there as they used to be. And, and I think they're kind of being crowded out by some of the more, like I said, the generous orthodoxy kind of crowd, the TGC crowds, the whatever else who say, look, we want to be a humble, gracious, Christ-saturated type of theology. And so I think that's kind of been the tone that we've seen emerge especially in the last 10 years.
Yes. Yeah. I think, and there is it's also not, you mentioned Wesleyan Church. And, John Wesley and George Whitefield back in the days of the Great Awakening, right. This caused a riff, actually, this idea of, are you coming to God or is God saving you? Essentially, that fine point caused some coolness between John Wesley and George Whitefield for a very short period of time. But it seemed like then later their camps sort of like, they weren't even throwing stones at each other. They were just sort of encamped in their viewpoint. Sure. But John Wesley and George Whitefield themselves always took great care to not let that become a division in their ministry. Mm-hmm. And then I think it actually became a little bit bigger of an issue when I forget which one passed away first. But I was just reading a book on that. It was fascinating that, and I think that goes to your point, which people that don't believe this, I mean, I know a lot of really, really, really avid, faithful, on fire believers that would disagree with me on this point.
Absolutely.
John Wesley being one of them from years and years past.
Yeah. And I think what I love about him and Whitefield in their relationship was they did work really hard to keep it focused on the gospel and create, Now, they would definitely disagree on some of the Methodism type aspects to it to some degree. But even Whitefield was more generous about that than probably many other Reformed theologians may have been at that time, or Puritan theologians, whatever they may be. And so I think that is a good model to say, look, we may have very strong differences when it comes to these theologies. It doesn't mean, but I really hate it when we see people throw stones at people,
right?
As if they just, and I hate it when people try to caricature, because I've seen it happen in my world. People caricature me and my beliefs. Mm-hmm. I hate it when people who are more Reformed do that of Arminians or.
I totally agree. I can't stand it. I don't want any part of that. Yeah. I just grew up being taught, and I firmly believe this. Like, if you have something bad to say about someone, you need to say it to their face, or something negative.
And I agree with Tim Keller when he says the best way to critique your opponent is to say exactly what your opponent would say about their beliefs. So don't say what you think they should, what you think about their beliefs, but actually say the only fair way to debate someone else's opinions, views, is to actually
characterize
them the way that your opponent would characterize their own views.
Yes, yes, yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was helpful for me too was reading Sam Storm's book Convergence, because Sam is an admitted charismatic Calvinist.
It's an interesting world, yes.
Yeah,
Who knew this was going to happen, right?
Right.
I think some people might be regretting that they actually let this through at some point. So,
but I think that is one that might be a slight misunderstanding that some people may have of the Reformed camp, is that they don't believe in. They don't pay quite as much attention to the moving of the Holy Spirit, and I don't think that needs to be true.
No, I think there's a lot more sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. I mean, you can't read Jonathan Edwards honestly and not see, when in the Great Awakening, you can't see that he didn't have a sensitivity to the Spirit and how the Spirit was moving. And that's just and here's a guy who wrote monologue sermons that were sinners in the hand of an angry God, things like that. Like, this was a guy who believed in the work of the Spirit and his movement in people's lives, and so he was definitely going to give deference to, hey, what is God really doing here, instead of being the people like, well, this is not really God moving. And so yeah.
Well, like, I have a lot of friends that devout believers, passionate. I respect them and look up to them for their faith. That would be in the Arminian camp, okay? But I feel like we have so much more in common. I feel like together we would strive to battle cultural, dead, mainstream, socially advantageous Christianity. Like, it's time that just goes away.
Yes, I could not agree with that more.
Showing up to church on a Sunday morning because it's actually better for your life. It's better for your family. It's better for your financial well-being if you go to church. There's not a life there. I just feel like together, like that we should be scared of. That's not anything that anyone wants to be a part of, because that does not lead to life. There's not life there. And it also seems like what worse sort of, like, how could you reflect more poorly on God that you're going to use him to your advantage like that when it's advantageous?
Yeah. And I think, I can run down that rabbit trail for hours and hours and hours. And anyone who's spent much time with me knows that I want to be generous as much as I possibly can with people who may, whether it be methodologically or programmatically, differ from me on some things, and certainly pray that God would still use those churches and those pastors to see a lot of people come to know Christ. So having that as my kind of sub point here, but kind of the layer under all this, I'm praying, even in this day, as we're kind of all having to step back, and as much as I long to be back as a church, I'm hoping that at least, it'll cause us as pastors to sit back and say, what is really important in our ministry? And so going back to, the mentioning of the Puritans here a little while ago, I'm going through and just reading a whole bunch of stuff. Packer's new compilation that we got, T4G sent us as a free book, and I've just been just eating that one up. And just really understanding what was behind that. And it wasn't really a movement so much as it was a revival. It was a seeking to be a revival among the Church of England, and to get them focused on essential things, the preaching of the gospel, the care for the saints and shepherd the saints in a very strong way. And of course, letting go of so many of these side experiential issues that tended to kind of envelop the whole Church of England at the time. And so all that conflict that was right there was really rooted in a sense of saying purity was like, we wanted to purify the church. It was, and this goes back to the conversation about like Calvinists. Like, sometimes Calvinists and Reformed folks get this reputation just because we're serious about the Bible, that somehow or another we're serious about like taking the fun out of church or, whatever else. Right. And it's like just so not true. Like you were talking about, like, I love a cigar, I love bourbon, I love sitting on the back deck with my friends and enjoying those kind of things. And I laugh a lot and have a really good time. But I think, and I would imagine most of the Puritans would have been right there with me in that. Didn't hope I didn't defile some sacred thing there, but I don't really know. But But going back to this, like I really think in our day, there really is a need for us to be praying for the purity of the church and getting back to us. And if anything happens out of this, though I don't ever want to see anyone, I want to see the church's influence to continue to grow, but I also want the church's influence to grow from a healthy perspective.
Yes.
And I feel like right now we have our focus on so many things other than Christ.
Yes.
And being the local church. And
yes.
What Luther and Calvin and all the magisterial reformers would have said, the essentials of a true church are the preaching of the gospel, the celebration of the ordinances or sacraments, and discipline, the local church.
Yes.
So
absolutely. Speaking of bourbon, have you had Kentucky Owl?
I have not.
I'm going to have a little bit. Do you want some?
Sure.
Kentucky Owl. This is Dixon Dedman's family in Kentucky.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They make a great bourbon. They sold the company a few years ago, I believe. But they make good bourbon. All right. From Kentucky. If you can't, Kentucky Owl.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Did you know, by the way...
New sponsor.
Yeah.
So.
The sponsor in this podcast, Kentucky Owl. By the way, did you know that I think it's like 85 or 90% of the bourbon in America comes from Kentucky?
Yeah.
It's like the Napa Valley of bourbon. Yeah, it's all Kentucky.
It is. And my wife, she begrudgingly watched I forget exactly what it's called, but it was like it was a story about bourbon, and we saw it on Hulu. I was like, I got to watch this, but I didn't realize like all of the things that go into bourbon and what can be classified as bourbon versus whiskey.
Right,
it's a whole science to it. It's a beautiful story.
It's fascinating.
It made me really go. I want to nerd out on this for a while, but I haven't forced myself to do that. So we'll see.
Anyhow, what is it about cultural Christianity that could get you going for hours?
Distraction. It appears to me that cultural Christianity is, I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. It just distracts us from the center. It distracts us from the main thing being the main thing. And for me, it is, like even when churches talk about, say, for instance, expository preaching. Well, it's expository preaching, but if you don't have very crisp, for instance, application, which I'm again a believer in application, all right, but I feel like it ends up being more of kind of flattening the scriptures and sometimes flattening the gospel witness. And it's like, okay, what's really important is that we're just busy with certain types of weekly types of things.
Yes. Yep.
And so I think that would be my first level. Is I just really feel like we have people who just don't have been inoculated in the experience of the cultural church. Mm-hmm. And I would say that doesn't necessarily mean just contemporary churches. I think that can happen, of course, in traditional churches as well. But I think we're just so inoculated with just this cultural experience of Christianity that we really don't see Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I like Ray's famous sentence is, we want to be the antidote to Bible Belt religion, right? Mm-hmm. And so I love that. I think that's always hanging out there for me when I'm talking to someone. Like, this is like when you come to our church, and we've had people say this when they've visited our church. Like, it feels like they've discovered the gospel. They may have been believers for a long time, and I'd say that probably in some ways was me, but I wouldn't necessarily say I would have just got saved in that moment, but I really believe there was a whole layer that was peeled off that I was blind to for years.
Yes, I can relate to that.
And I'm not saying that's exclusively reformed.
Yeah, no, I get it.
My buddy at the church we meet at, we rent from, he's more of Wesleyan tradition, and but he would say very much the same convictions as far as the local church, the preaching of God's word, that kind of thing that is just so missing from the average everyday experience of the believer.
Yes. Well, what do you think is behind that distraction? Because is it an unwillingness to just have the guts to just leave behind the religion altogether? Is it, people pleasing type of a thing, or is it they're just trying to do the best that they can, and maybe haven't heard quite the whole gospel, but feel like maybe something is amiss or something is awry in their life, and so they just kind of insist on distractions. Like, what's behind that distraction? Because I actually think that's a pretty good word. It's a pretty good word for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this could probably be chased down in a lot of different directions, but I mean, I'm almost because a pastor. I think we are so afraid as pastors to do anything that might mess up like what we perceived as success, which is numbers. That somehow or another that's going to end up being a detriment to us because we depend so much on numbers and of course all the different resources that come along with the numbers to we carry on instead of looking at this going, instead of evaluating this is this really being fruitful? Our fruitfulness is only one dimensional, and it is how many people do we have, how many butts do we have in seats, and how many people are plugging into the live stream on Sunday mornings and so on and so forth. And so we've basically defined evangelism exclusively that way now. Mm-hmm. And instead of going, no, evangelism is the fruit of the preaching of the gospel. Mm-hmm. And it happens both, of course, on Sunday mornings, hopefully, by God's grace, maybe slowly, and but it also happens as our people are being transformed by the preaching of the gospel, mm-hmm. and they're going out there being real witnesses to people in the everyday stuff of life. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's just so much of this unwillingness. See, you can control programs. You can control even the impact of programs. We can all put metrics in place saying, based on these numbers from last year, we can assume that we can grow this much this next year. And mm-hmm. and then you put certain things in place to make sure that you achieve those goals. And mm-hmm. it runs more like a business.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have those mediums.
Yep.
But I think that becomes it's the end. That's the end that runs everything.
Yes.
And so we evaluate our effectiveness only through those kinds of grids instead of saying, you can't, when you believe in a spirit-driven, scripture-saturated type of environment, you can't control the outcome sometimes, and you have to be okay with it.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of times as pastors, we're just afraid to we think we just measure everything by that. It becomes its own. It becomes the only thing. It becomes us chasing our own tails a lot of times.
Yes. Yeah.
And listen, I've been there and I've done it many times, and I still do it probably from time to time.
Yep. But with this distraction, another thing that can happen too is that we consciously or subconsciously, it seems to me at some point a lot of the stuff had to be conscious at some point 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whenever some of this stuff kind of trickles in, but it becomes subconscious extremely quickly, which is very scary. It's very dangerous, but we can focus on certain things so that we can still do our thing and feel okay about it. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that I think we do that is by focusing on the what and the when and the how mm-hmm. instead of the who.
Right.
And for me, that's sort of become like a test. If I'm around people, or I'm hearing a sermon, or I'm listening to a certain teaching, or I'm reading a book, like whatever it is. But that's become one of the early signs for me, just to getting a feel for like, all right, what's going on here? What do we believe? If the focus in almost any text is the what and the when and the how. And I think that particularly comes out with like eschatology, which, right. I understand that. That's the whole thing of eschatology is, what's going to happen and when and some of those things. But even in eschatology, the primary focus should be on the who.
Right.
And even like Sunday was a great example of this. Pastor TJ Timms from Emmanuel Nashville, where we attend, was preaching on John 14:2-3, and it's talking about, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, there's many rooms, that type of thing. And, I'm thinking he's going to get into some thoughts on what happens when we die. Where do we go? Is there an intermediate? Is there a paradise? And then new heavens, new earth, like those types of things. But actually the focus is on like Christ going to the cross for us. And the focus was on the who, which I really respect. But don't you think that's if in conversation or in churches or Sunday morning, or like, because that should be one test. That should be a red flag, is if we're always so focused on what and when and how, mm-hmm. and not Absolutely. So much focused on the who, because that is the who is what changes lives. Right. That's what draws people to repentance.
That's right. Yeah, I could not agree more. I think the what we've seen is that there's so much focus on the vehicle. And I wouldn't even say use. I even haven't used the word the church there because I don't think the church is the vehicle so much as it's a new people. But we've kind of created this. The way we even talk about the church is it's a vehicle that's getting us, it's taking us somewhere. And I even hate talking about the church that way, but that's what it has become. I feel like. And so it instead of us about we are, going to be people who see Jesus, it becomes more of, well, what do you do to keep the machine going?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, do I pray and hope that our church continues to grow? I certainly do. I hope that in 10 years from now, we look back and go, man, God, you've been faithful. And hopefully we've been faithful and we've dealt with things appropriately as we see Scripture teach us. But I think we have. So I think there's some of that, but I also think a lot of it is what we value in American culture, which is experience. We value the emotional tie to it, and so if you think about it, a lot of our church experience has become quite emotive, rather than And I would even say it's cautioning even the way we in some of our reform campuses, like, do we tend to go a little more emotive? And I'm not saying not spirit driven, but we tend to focus on how do people experience this. Yeah. And I don't know that that's my job to help people experience it, other than just be faithful and trust the Spirit to apply it to people as they need to. Yes. And that takes. Listen, I'm not saying I'm comfortable there. Yeah. I try to manipulate those experiences as much as anybody if I'm not careful. But I think we have to be aware of that notion that tends to be there. I think.
Yeah. I agree. And I think some of the values. I don't know if this is an American thing or if this is a thing of being in the 21st century, but just the values on wealth and money and capitalism. Right. I'm a fan of capitalism. Yeah. It's both treated me very well and it's both treated me very poorly. I've experienced both ends of this. Right. But it's chasing the dollar is it's way more prevalent, I think, than we're willing to admit today. It seems to me, but it gets even more scary than that, because it's not just all right. We're distracted by chasing the dollar. Like we think, if we're not careful, we can assume that the good godly people like have their stuff in order. They're going to be wealthy. Like, we would never agree that wealth or money is above God. But if it's not a close second, then you've got a problem. Like, all right, God first, sure, but money should be a close second. Success should be a close second. Like, you have a stewardship. Right. You have a steward, and this is where it gets scary, is because we couch in some of these terms, because like you have a stewardship for the good of your family, for the good of all these things. Like, you need to don't be spending too much time, reading the Bible. Like, don't be a freak. Don't sure, you can be a Christian for sure, love God and be passionate about it, but man, don't spend too much time there. Like, you got to be focused on providing income, making sure the next generation is better than your generation, setting your family up for success. Sure. And if that's not somewhere pretty close to the top, then you're sort of a weird, radicalized version of a Christian, that people don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, and man, that is so true, because I think when we come down to this, it becomes, the church becomes more of a product to sell. And so you do get the whole consumer mentality that's out there. And so even some of the conversations, and I hate to say this, even with my own tribe, my own brothers, that we've had conversations with among ourselves, I've been increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of that we have to protect the product during this season of being sheltered in, and certainly want to make sure that we provide as much as we can to encourage the people and encourage our congregations. But I've sensed this kind of fear of, well, we got to keep our brand out there. That sounds very strong. I don't necessarily mean that, but just keep our, we got to be out there, because otherwise, if we're not in front of people, then they forget about us, and then if we don't forget about us, then that's going to have detriments on the organization, on the machine, and so although I didn't follow this practice, I really appreciated Mark Dever, and I think a lot of people didn't follow this practice, but they chose not to do any live stream on Sunday mornings.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they chose to be like, hey, our elders are going to be on call. They're going to be calling our members quite regularly. I'm going to be certainly sending out letters and emails to our people and opportunities for that. And so again, there's something about that I really appreciate, although I didn't necessarily follow that to that T.
Sure.
Because they were like, it's not a product to just be consumed.
Right.
And that's the only fear I have in this season, is that I don't want to send the message that the church is a product to be consumed, because I think that's largely what American evangelicalism has become.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, that I think can be one of the, I think one of the things that COVID-19 is giving us is essentially a front row seat on how, and maybe even why, you can't just receive this product and go on your way and be happy and blessed and transformed, because people can still get this product, air quotes, via their TV or their computer, their smartphone on a Sunday morning. And yet we're all sitting here saying this is not the same. We're missing something.
Right.
The body's not together. The members are not, the membership or the members that, we're not together on a Sunday morning where the body is missing something.
That's right.
And so this should be the best example of, hey, if you were coming to church and you were after that product, well, guess what? Now you have it. How does it feel? No, you need more. You need more than that. Right. It's more than just listening to some words, checking a box, and going about your way.
Yeah, and I think, and again, this is completely, I'm not a prophet, but I would assume that if you have been operating on the model where church is product, and it's something to be consumed, that if you can do what you're doing well without having the building open, you may take a hit from that when this is all said and done, because people go, well, gosh, I mean, I've gotten kind of used to watching church in my pajamas on Sunday mornings, and you've assured me that I can still be a Christian and be at home, and I can, and even for us, and again, I want to be charitable here, because I think some churches have arrived at different conclusions, and we do Lord's Supper every Sunday. We've chosen not to during this season.
Right.
And only because of the fact that we feel like we just don't believe you can do it.
Yeah.
It's a body gathered kind of thing.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So again, knowing other churches have followed a different path, that's fine. Even good, solid, reformed, gospel-centered guys have followed a different path. Love them. And we're good brothers and friends. But I just don't ever want to send the message that you can do this the same way at home that you can when you actually are with God's people.
Yes,
you can't.
Yes, I agree. So would you not think then that the best antidote to this Bible Belt Christianity, which is not just in the Bible Belt, I mean, it's all over, this cultural Christianity that's basically dead, what it needs is not so much for those people to just stop going to church or to just drop, whatever semblance of the Christian faith they have at this point. It doesn't need them to essentially leave the faith altogether. It needs revival.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
We need a sweeping, powerful, transforming revival. I mean, it happened in 1740 in New England. Right. It happened in the 60s, the Jesus movement in California.
That's right.
Like it can happen again. But I'm 35 years old, and I have not personally witnessed a rampant citywide, statewide, countrywide revival where conversations shift, where there's just conversions, where there's it's happening there's conversions every day, of course, all around us, but this idea of a citywide or a countrywide revival, I've not seen. And so part of in my mind, I have this doubt in the back, like, couldn't it happen? Can it actually happen? Like, I understand it happened in the past, but could it ever happen again? Will it ever happen again? But man, that's one of the best things we should be agitating for right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Reformation was. It was revival. And I think that's what Puritanism was. It was revival. It was saying that striving for the purity of the church is revival. I can't see it any other way. When you're striving for the church to be the church as God has intended the church to be, and you begin to let loose of all these other exterior, kind of third level, fourth level kind of trappings, it begins to kind of get the church back to saying, this is about Jesus and about people being transformed in Christ. It's about people being the people of God who have been redeemed by God, living as the people of God for the glory of God. And I think that's really, really important to remember during this day. So every revival has always had those kinds of impulse. It's rarely been, yes, there's been certainly mass conversions, but I think mass conversions came as a result of unconverted people, and frankly, even unconverted pastors, as some of the Puritans would say,
Right. Yeah.
who actually got saved and started preaching the real gospel.
Yes.
When they become convinced of the gospel, all of a sudden, other people become convinced of the gospel.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So,
well, John and Charles Wesley, great examples of that.
Right.
Both of those guys self-admittedly were preaching for some time before they were converted.
Right.
And they weren't seeing fruit.
Right.
So, as well, I guess we shouldn't expect to see fruit if we're preaching the gospel message and we're not converted.
Right.
How do you work towards revival as lead pastor of your church, personally or maybe corporately, or how do you work towards revival?
Well, one of the books that's been helpful for me, and I honestly cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it was by Jonathan Edwards, when he said, what is and what necessarily is not the work of the Spirit, kind of thing. And he lists also, I forget the name of the book.
Something about the affections, religious affections, right?
Yeah.
Was that an article or a book?
It is, but there was a small sliver of it that he released,
Okay.
and they released of his, and I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it'll hit me here maybe a little bit later. But he just kind of outlines like what is evidence of the work of the Spirit and what is not evidence, not necessarily evidence of the work of the Spirit. And I think one thing that I try to remind myself is, again, we should not think simply because we got a big, full building of people is an evidence of the work of the Spirit. On the other hand, we should not think that a smaller church that's faithful, showing up and seeing under the normal, average, everyday means of grace, under the preaching of the word, the gathering with the body, is not an evidence of grace, not an evidence of the Spirit. So, one, try not to put a whole lot of weight on externals, because some of those things can be very deceiving. Now, again, some small churches could very well be an indication that the Spirit's not here and the Spirit's not working. So I think there's, and we're not privy to this. He doesn't send out a newsletter. Holy Spirit does not send out a newsletter every week going, "This is where I'm working this week."
Right. Yep.
But so I think for me, how do I pursue revival is, as much as I'm able, when I'm preaching week in and week out, the one thing I want to make sure I'm doing, or at least pursuing, is saying, have I been moved by this text? God, are you moving through my life in that way? I know a lot of pastors say that, and I've said that in a very superficial way myself, but even more recently going, God, before I come and give this product, if you want to use that terminology, to the people, have I been moved by your word? And if not, move me, or move me out of the way, I guess is another way you might want to look at, which is a very concerning prayer to pray if you actually mean that. Move me out of the way if I'm not being moved by your word. And I think there is, and listen, there's a guy, R. Scott Clark, again, probably one of those cantankerous, Presbyterians out there who narrows his definition of what it means to be reformed, but that's neither here nor there. He just really distinguishes between piety and pietism. Pietism is more focused on the externals, and piety is more about what we're doing that puts our eyes on Jesus.
Yes.
So there's a difference. Pietism is more of it's focused on what you're doing.
Yes.
And rather than piety is more of what you're doing and its means to lead you to see Jesus.
Yes.
And so I'm just trying to, I mean, it's for some people it seems becomes a misnomer, but I want to gather with the church because it is part of pursuing revival.
Yes.
I think I want to be under preaching because it is about pursuing revival. I want to be in the Word daily and prayer daily because it is about pursuing revival. And so those are markers. I shouldn't necessarily say those things are evidences of the Spirit, but I should never say that they're not. And even if I don't see the fruit that I want to see.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to experience in my lifetime, which I have a couple years left, Lord willing, but it's this idea of conversations in a city, wholesale conversations changing.
Right.
In the 40s, you could not go to a bar without hearing conversations about Jesus.
Right.
Business meetings, it would trickle in. Town hall meetings, the conversation at a secular, wholesale, societal level changed.
That's right.
I want to be able to walk down Broadway just because Nashville is our city.
Right.
walk down Broadway, and yeah, let's keep the music pumping. Yeah, I don't care. Music is fantastic. A lot of it is. It's great. In addition to the music, I want to be able to overhear multiple conversations, working my way from Bridgestone down to the river about Jesus and God and the Holy Bible and things of that nature. And I just the idea that at a societal level conversations can shift because of revival, that man, that's something that would be worth spending your life towards.
Well, and I think really exploring, going over to the more continental Reformed thinkers like the Dutch Reformed, you have this mentality of Christ in everything. Right? There's not one square inch of Abraham Kuyper, not one square inch into heaven that Jesus doesn't say is mine. Butchering that quote, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. Most people would. And I think that's what you're espousing, is the fact that when we begin to be conscientiously aware of the fact that everything is Christ and everything we need to bring Christ into everything as God's people.
Yes,
we begin to say that's the only way revival takes shape, and you start seeing citywide and regional wide, and maybe even nationwide types of revivals.
Yes,
right.
And then we need more of the John Coopers of this world, lead singer for the band Skillet. Have you ever heard Skillet?
Oh yes.
So I had known Skillet I don't know if they're quote unquote Christian or not, but
they were in that realm, yeah.
But they were in that realm, or maybe are. I'm not sure. But for the most part, now you're just getting straight up rock and roll, right?
Right.
For the most part. Mm-hmm. Well, as it turns out, John Cooper is a hardcore believer.
Right.
I mean, this guy is serious about his faith.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
I was just listening to him on a podcast this past week, and man, he's not pulling any punches. Like, he can't make it through a few sentences without. There's some, Christ is getting interjected here, or his motivations are getting interjected there. Like, you can just tell, like, this guy believes the word. He's serious about it, and he plays rock and roll.
That's right. My worship leader he loves the arts. He loves music, and he loves every kind of music. If you want to know what the latest bands are like, that's guy. I'm like, dude, give me 2 or 3 groups. I'm old now, so tell me someone I need to be listening to.
Exactly.
And so I always go to him and ask him that question sometimes, and he loves movies, he loves cinematography and whatever, and one of the things I always say to him is like, look, at the end of the day, when we start to see that Christ has a place in all of that, and how we understand that, and how we begin to think through, the worldliness that we are consuming, and we begin to see Jesus, like it shapes how we see and view and understand what's at the heart of those things. And
yes,
that's when I think we see revival sometimes through those means, even though it may not be quite as prevalent or mainstream. Because then I think that's going to be, and I do think revival is going to be a harder thing to judge in our day and age when we have so much in front of us in terms of entertainment. I mean, especially now when all we can do is sit at home and watch YouTube, and Netflix and whatever else. It's going to become harder, and we have to begin to ask ourselves, what is our criteria for revival, right? Because we could see revival much more distinctly when you didn't have as much, noise in the background. Now we have a whole lot of noise in the background.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So,
yeah, you're right about that. What? So cultural Christianity, definitely a big thing facing the church today. Right. Is there other issues you're paying attention to? Is there other issues that you see just kind of at scale? Because some of these things, man, we don't realize until history gives us that benefit. History gives us that clear vision. I'm always curious of how in the world were we ever? How in the world were a lot of churches ever okay with slavery? Dude, like, come on.
Right.
Read the Bible.
Blind spots, right?
And yet blind spots. And so, there has to be blind spots today. You can't tell me there's not. Is there some blind spots you're paying attention to? Is there some, or maybe not even blind spots, just it's like blatant and it's obvious, but challenges that you see that the church is facing today?
Well, I think a lot of it will revolve around social media. And what I mean by that is we have, and I think we see this even I think that we see this across all, sociological groups. But I think social media has ushered in a generation of thinking where we become our own experts, right? So we can go and live in our own little world. We can get our own little slice of the internet, and we can say, well, that's authoritative. And so right now is a good example of that, right? Everyone has their opinion about what should happen with this virus. Instead of saying, trusting our government, which, by the way, Scripture has very, very clear admonition on, trust our authorities and whatever else in this time, so long as they're proven to be wise and we're not being forced to do something that would be ungodly or whatever.
Yep.
And so I think in that we've got to learn that I'm fearful sometimes that in our efforts to say what is true or what we hope is true, we're actually undermining truth by questioning everything. So this whole idea of fake news, everything now can be labeled fake news. And I see this on the left, you see this on the right, and you see that, and Christians need to stop and be more. We need to be more wise about this and wise in our engagements instead of saying and I see too many Christians just throw everything under the bus. And they'll question the government, they'll try to question the CDC, and they'll question this and that. Now, again, I think there's room to say, I think everything has room to be critiqued, and everything has room to be questioned. But when we only question it from just what little bit of information that I've been able to ascertain, and I've never went to school, and I never have years of experience in some of these areas, I'm fearful that what we're doing is all we're doing is producing. We're contributing to skepticism, which, by the way, ends up undercutting what we're trying to do as God's people. So, again, I even just recently wrote my blog article that I put on our post on our church website about, let's be careful, because that when we engage in these necessary conversations, that we don't distract people with those things other than Jesus, and really bring Jesus back to it. So let's not undercut the truth of Jesus by getting into these side conversations about what you feel about vaccines and what you feel about CDC and what you feel about COVID-19 and even, going and being fair, being on the other side where I have friends who are like, just shut up and do what they tell you to do.
Right.
I don't think that necessarily either. I think we can have meaningful conversations about the economy as well as the danger of this thing. This idea that you have to be all in or all out on either side is just, it's infuriating, and frankly, it's just stupid. It's incredulous. It's dumb.
Yes.
So.
Oh, dude, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is I'm just seeing it spread like wildfire right now. It just seems so rampant. And dude, first of all, anytime, you have to understand, I consider myself the chief of sinners, dude. Seriously.
Amen.
I disappoint myself quite frequently. I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to producing for the Lord how I should be. I don't think I'm as disciplined as I should be. You have to understand, I genuinely believe that about myself.
Amen.
If there's a picture of the worst sinner, it's got to have my face on it. Okay.
I put myself there too.
And, you sometimes run across these people who profess to be believers and I think are, and dude, they are so into the vaccine thing or not,
right?
And the conspiracies or not, and I'm not talking about I have a whole bunch of friends that are also kind of into some of this conspiracy at I don't know, but I guess what I would consider a more surface level. I mean, they're pretty into it right now, you know what I mean? But it's not consuming their life. But dude, some of this stuff consumes people's lives, years of their life.
Right.
Everything that they're posting is about some of these issues, and you can't tell me they've got it all figured out, and you can't tell me a lot of this stuff is based on fact.
Yeah.
But it comes back to distraction, dude. I wonder how much of this is just a need to distract themselves from the real pain in their life.
Just preach that one all day long, because I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing happen, especially in this, you hear people say it's fake news, and then, the media can't be trusted, and so on and so forth. And look, I am under no illusions that the media does not have a bias. In fact,
Sure.
it's absolutely impossible for any
They're
media not to
privately
have
owned. I mean, they have CEOs
Right.
that have self-interest. And,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
I get all that.
It absolutely to say that they can be unbiased. It's just ridiculous.
Yes.
But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't listen to them and discern what is probably attempt to be as factual as possible, be as honest and unbiased as possible. And when they are, probably infusing a little bit of their own, like for me, I'm a big NPR guy and I know where NPR gets. I'm a big NPR guy. I love listening to these guys. Now I probably would disagree with a good portion of what's on there from a Christian perspective.
Okay.
So being frank, but at the same time, I do appreciate at least some sense of like, just lay out the facts.
Yes.
And let's try to discern what those are. And certainly everyone's going to have some commentary on that.
Yes.
I think at the end of the day, when we see this happening out there, it is people are so like they want answers more than God. And so they want God's answers more than God himself. And so my fear is that many Christians, in an attempt to try to explore what could be some things behind all of the decisions being made in our government and in this COVID-19, and just using this as the present experience we're having, is that we actually are not bringing people to like rest in Christ. Like right now, I think one of the greatest things we can do as a church is to be repentant, be humble, and be grief-stricken. It's okay to be there.
Yep.
Like I don't want to be the happy pastor on Sunday mornings in my live stream. I want them to say, this is real. This is a loss, but Jesus is good and he ministers to us in it. And one day, gloriously, unless Jesus returns, we're going to be able to gather in this room again.
Yes.
And I think that middle ground kind of conversation just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we're dangerously close to almost, again, undercutting our own influence by being so focused on all these other things. Right.
I totally agree. 1 Timothy 4, 7, and 8 have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Now, as I read this, keep in mind, this is not paraphrased. This is straight out of the ESV.
Right.
Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. And then jumping forward a little bit, which is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. And then 1 Timothy 1:4, don't devote yourselves to myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculation rather than the stewardship or good order from God that is by faith.
That's right.
Like the speculations, and we're not caught up in endless genealogies right now, but we are caught up in myths and speculation. I guess what makes me the most disappointed, maybe even, that's a kind of a strong word. I don't know if sad's the right word, but is when people damage their credibility by dipping into speculation.
So,
like why? Like I understand you have these questions. Like
for the sake of the gospel, shut up.
Exactly.
Can I?
Exactly.
Is it okay to say that?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes. For the sake of the gospel, shut up.
Right.
Because what happens is, there's just a ton of them out there. Okay, they're all over the place. But one of the ones I was looped in on is, someone heard from someone who heard from someone that the power is going to go out March 31st. It's going to be out for 10 days, at which time the whole world order is going to shift, at which time thus and thus is going to happen, and be prepared. Well, guess what? It didn't happen. Now, however, do we just move on? Do we forget about it? Is everything good to go? Is everything normal? Yeah, on one hand, whoever heard that from, I understand, I get it. Maybe they were concerned about it. Maybe it was disguised in goodwill, or maybe it was straight goodwill. Maybe they were taking care for everyone to get prepared for March 31st, 10 days, power's out, internet's out, and everyone should be prepared. But on the other hand, it was heard from someone who heard from someone, and they're warning people, and you can't take your words back, dude. So you can't take your words back. So it's not like,
and how many people
no
were
harm, no
distracted?
foul.
How many people were distracted?
Massively distracted. I mean, fortunately, I understood the context and gave it zero thought and was zero concerned about it.
Right.
But this is what I wanted to point out is that words matter. And so I will do my best to move on. I'm not going to circle back around and be like, well, that didn't happen.
Right.
Like I'm not into any of that. You gotta trust me on this, but however, it changes my perception of someone when they're constantly spewing these things. And
it's hard not to.
It's hard not to.
Especially as a pastor, by the way, just speaking that from a pastoral standpoint.
You mean when you see pastors doing this?
No, when I see members of my congregation engaging in it.
Well, I have to think. Yeah, I'd have to.
It's hard.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But there's a, I don't know. There's just I feel like it takes a little bit of a knock on your credibility, on your effectiveness when you're really caught into these conspiracies and the could-haves and what ifs and all of this. Like,
I agree 100% with that. I think the one of the ones that I've heard go around was, Trump's going along with the COVID-19 because they're trying to flush out, these child abductors who live under a major city.
I don't understand it.
I don't understand it either, and I don't know much about it, and I honestly have no desire to explore it.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I don't want to be the guy who's searched for that on my phone. To be honest with you, and my wife would have a lot of questions for me if she saw me do that.
Yeah.
But I've heard that, and Tom Hanks apparently is at the source of this, and I've heard all kinds of
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates is now, and again, now look, there's no doubt there are people out here who want everyone to be getting vaccinated, and they want to use this as ways to track people. I mean, do I believe that those people exist? Absolutely, I do believe that there are people who do not have Christian intents, and they want to control the world, control the population.
Yeah,
that's been in existence for a very, very long time. So I don't necessarily disagree that some of those things may be afoot.
Mm-hmm.
But I highly doubt our president, and I'm just going to put my has tanked the economy by which he has built his entire political career off of. Right. I mean, I highly doubt he's doing this to flush out child abductors from under every major epicenter of our country.
Probably not.
I have a hard time believing that.
There's a chance, but there'd be better ways.
I mean, I don't think he'd be the one to do it. Let's just put it that way.
Well, and furthermore, if that was the case, don't you think this would be preached from the highest mountaintop? Like, here's this guy who's doing right, and they're saving all that stuff that's to their political advantage, right?
And not to make this political, but have we ever known Trump to keep his mouth shut on things that he thinks he can get glory from? I mean,
right.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time really following that track of my mindset.
Yes.
But for me, it is so I've heard that, and I've heard all these different little things on the side, and and it grieves me for a couple of ones. One is that, why are you consumed with that?
Right.
How does Jesus bring you hope in that?
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, when you spew this information out on the web, social media, how many people who are either Christian or maybe not Christian or on the fringe are reading that nonsense and getting distracted by the very same thing that you're distracted by?
Exactly.
And that really grieves me as a pastor. It grieves me as a Christian that we have lost sight of what this opportunity actually may be.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. What you mentioned reading some of the Puritans. What how do you think the Puritans would be approaching what we're dealing with right now? Maybe not even COVID, but just at this point in the church.
Well, they were such reasoned people. Like, their preaching was reasoned, exposition. And I think they would just apply biblical, Christ-focused, gospel-centered reason to these matters. And again, I said earlier that I think we've become more of an emotive society. I think we've moved away from reasoned, and we think that reason somehow means unspiritual.
Right.
And that's just not true. Emotive does not mean spiritual. No more spiritual than being reasoned means more spiritual. And we could use a lot more reason in our pulpits on Sunday mornings, frankly. So
now, do you just mean by the way the preaching is done, or do you mean get the preaching back into Scripture?
Both. I think I think it is about how it's done. I do think there is some of that to be said, because it's becomes more about how you keep your crowd engaged instead of being, we're going in Scripture, we're going to dive in deep, we're going to be reasoned about it. And I don't think we necessarily need to go back to times when you're spending 8 weeks on 4 verses or any of that kind of stuff. But I do think we need to have a well-reasoned pulpit in the society. And I do think it does need to come back to, but I do think 100% has to be Scripture. It has to be Scripture. If it's not, we're just, how can you reason if you don't have truth to reason from? That just doesn't make any sense.
Yes, but it also is an investment. It's also a commitment. It also takes time. It also takes study, all of these things. Sure. And so if someone wants to preach, a sermon in their local church, and it's going to be Holy Spirit led, and they put, an hour, 30 minutes into it, and they just kind of plan on, well, it's really not doing the text justice. Like, it takes work, it takes time, it takes a commitment to really try to do the best you can on like figuring out what is in the text and then preaching from there, as opposed to, current events or 5 tips for that, 10 tricks for this. Right. It's almost like clickbait.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely. Could not agree more. I think we need pastors who are willing to see that their time in the Word, as it relates to preparing sermons that are just Christ exalting and compelling and reasoned, takes time. And the other things that tend to distract us, like what's the next event we're going to be doing, or all the other elements of the worship service, typically, what this song needs to be here and how this is going to contribute to that, which we are big on liturgy in our church. So we focus on, we do. 100%. We are very much regulatory principle kind of approach to Sunday morning worship. And so we think about the call to worship, we think about the benediction, we think about reading Scripture, we think about, and we're not necessarily trying to tie everything together, but we do try to, be as thoughtful about that as possible. And so we put some time into that. Yeah. But we put far more time into that than we do about like different elements that people want to experience, instead of, and our focus is more on the body, like confessing something together on Sunday mornings. Again, why we have to be together on Sunday mornings. Like, we do responsive readings that are part of our reading of the Word and Psalter and all that kind of stuff. And we still try to do responsive readings in a weird way and do a little weird pause. And it's so awkward, but it's okay. Yeah. We're still trying to do it. But it's not the same. But when you hear people in Sunday mornings respond with confidence that this is the Word of God, yes, that's what we're trying to focus on more than anything else. Yes. And so we just need pastors who say, look, and again, I'm not saying it's not throwing anyone under the bus. This has been a huge learning curve for me, and I'm nowhere even close to where I want to be and where I want my church to be, hopefully in the years to come. I just threw a whole new plan for, kind of amped up our liturgy plan for our church just a few months ago, or about a couple months ago, that we're hoping to kind of put in practice over the next few months. And, I'm sitting there with my elders who all agree with it, but they're all like wide-eyed, and Justin's like, and Justin and Josh and Delon, who are all amazing men, like, okay, and I get it. We're going to take time. It's going to take time to implement these things, because it takes time to adjust people's rhythms and how they understand, because you create a rhythm on Sunday morning. Yes. But I think pastors just need to get back to saying, the best thing you have to offer is a really well thought out, Christ exalting, reasoned sermon on Sunday mornings that helps people see Jesus and his like involvement and his relevance to their life now. Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, your thought though on piety versus pietism, that was a thought, right? Yeah. That's really helpful, because I am often grieved at how little pious I am. Like, I'm often grieved at my low level of piety. And I think that is maybe sometimes a misplaced perception on the Puritans that, they were all in their pietism. Right. They were very pious, but they were alive to God. Right. And I'm often grieved. I'll run into someone, Amy Romero. She was just on the podcast last week. She has a company, Love and Science. They do digital optimization basically in East Nashville. And we had done some work with them in, 2014, 2015. I didn't even know she was a believer. Right. I had her on the podcast to talk about digital marketing and maybe see where else it went. Well, as it turns out, I'm leaving that podcast feeling thoroughly convicted. Right. I mean, she is a devout believer. Like, she's what I think of as like a true believer. And then I'm sitting here thinking, what are you doing with your life, dude? Right. She read the Bible through 4 times last year, one time in 2 months. Right.
she's like, she doesn't watch R-rated movies. She barely watched PG-13 movies. And she's the first one to say, look, that's not the point. Draw the line wherever you want to draw the line. She would say that. And I totally agree with. I watch R-rated movies and I still will, but the devotion, I'm often grieved at my lack of piety.
Oh, I don't agree. I mean, being aware of it and actually seeing it implemented in your life are two different things sometimes. But again, you can't do anything. You can't implement those kinds of things. You can't try to see change in those areas without being aware of it. And what breaks my heart is that how people are not even aware of it, not even aware of the need. And so at least I'm grateful that the Spirit reveals that need in my own life when I see it in other people so clearly in other people. I mean, there are people I look at all the time like, man, why? Like, what's wrong with you, dude? I mean, like, come at me. And, but at the same time, like, I also praise God because he uses that as a way to shock my heart maybe into some sense of the next thing. And I always try to remind myself that everything's a degree by degree kind of thing. Like none of us changes overnight. It takes one degree after the other to see gospel change in our life. And and I will spend the rest of my life pursuing the very thing and never arrive at that, by the way.
Yes.
Until Jesus comes. We're not perfected until Jesus comes.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Thanks for that. This is a great word. I heard someone preach one time that sanctification is a lot like how they made the President's Faces on Mount Rushmore. Is they had an engineer or an architect figure out where everything needed to be, just like with building a house, and basically, put the stick of dynamite in this hole that was drilled at this particular depth and width and everything, and this guy's drilling, this spot over here, but he doesn't know the whole picture. Like you're just going by the plan. Right. You're doing your little work here. It doesn't even look right. You step back and hit blow, and boom, a bit of the mountain blows up, and boom, you have a president's nose.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that is how sanctification works in our life. Like we don't often, we don't see the whole picture as it's in process or progress. Right. But then, a few months goes by or some time goes by, and you realize, okay, well, this little part over here got cleaned up. So you keep pressing on. Yeah. The liturgies, though, is this something that you have used in your services for some time, or is this a recent thing? And what spawned that?
Well, I think we were starting to explore that at Providence before we left, and trying to be more serious-minded about what Sunday morning would be. And again, we still have a band, a guy playing guitar, cajon, and on stage, and singers and different things. We have a more minimalized group, mostly because of what was about necessity, and we're hopefully that'll continue to grow. But for us, as we begin to kind of explore, like just some things like prayer, like pastoral prayer, like really praying on Sunday mornings, and things that were just seemed to be missing because it became like, well, prayer doesn't excite anybody. That's why prayer doesn't happen. A lot of times it just, we might pray a little short 1 minute prayer, but like, do we actually pray like out loud together as a church, or the pastor lead us in an extended time of 4 or 5 minutes of prayer, or maybe even longer? I mean, we've had prayers of 8 or 9 minutes, and you're like, you better be ready.
That's long.
It is
in prayer years, in prayer minutes. That's really long.
I mean, that's like the whole service right there for some reason. But I would say that's still a new area that we're exploring and moving into. So we were starting that way. And I think when we stepped out and did our own thing at Grace, we took it just another level further. And that was like, we did Lord's Supper every Sunday. That was part of our liturgy. We did a kind of a call to worship. We did it, whatever else. And we didn't really do a benediction. And then eventually moved into, we need ascending every week after it. And then we read a verse together as a church and be sent out. Yeah. And then now I've done where we've kind of implemented like a benediction where I'm praying for and calling for the peace of the church as they move out into the world, things like that. We've recently raised famous call to worship has become a big deal among some people, and it made me really think, oh man, do we really call the church into worship? And so we've started thinking about that a little bit more. So it's a work in progress, and I wouldn't say necessarily we've arrived yet, but it's taking one step after the other and being more like, if we go back and look at some of the liturgies of the Reformation era and the Puritan era and whatever else, like there's so much rich stuff there, and it becomes very experiential. And it redefines. Let's put it this way: it's redefining what experience actually is, rather than what it's become, what it's known now in our kind of American context.
Yes,
so I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, as you're preaching, are you preaching to the members of your church, presumably believers, and you're looking to grow them, or are you preaching to the lost? Like who are you preaching to? Like, what's your philosophy there?
Well, ideally both. But I mean, if you were to say, if I had to put tip my hat in one direction, I would say preaching on Sunday mornings is primarily for the edification of the body. It is to challenge them, to love them, to edify them, to comfort them. Everything the gospel does should be being done through the preaching on Sunday mornings in various ways. Not every sermon hits every one of those notes, but over a course of a year, you're going to hit those notes quite often. Each one of those notes quite often. So I'd say primarily there, because it's the fruit of the preaching that in the lives of the believers, that's really that we're hoping for and praying for through the work of the Spirit. It's not so much the immediate fruit, because I think we've been so programmed by revivalism. Again, revival versus revivalism, like piety versus pietism. Revivalism says that you preach in such a way that people respond immediately, or so on and so forth, that they have this time. And I'm less convinced of that, and I think most Reformed guys are.
Yep.
And though we still would say, like, man, if God wants to save anybody, man, save them now, and we'll be here. And we always tell people, today it's time for you to know what it means to follow Jesus and to be a Christian. Man, we hope that this sermon has compelled you. And so during the Lord's Supper, we ask you to not take the Lord's Supper if you're not a believer yet, and go see one of our elders, go see one in the back, and go talk to them. We try to do that. We sometimes forget to do that, but as a whole, we try to make that a prominent thing at least several times a year, where we know, hey, this sermon's really going to be, man, it's going to hit on a note, and maybe it might stir people's hearts. And I mean, hopefully all of them should do that. Every message that's Christ-centered should have an element where it calls people to repentance and faith.
Right. Yes.
So yeah, you do want that, but I would still say I'm going to lean more towards the fruit of that's going to be bore out in the lives of our people when they leave that room on Sunday.
Yes. Yeah. In other words, you're not looking to change hearts across Smyrna with your voice to Smyrna necessarily on a Sunday morning, but rather your voice to the attendees, to the believers, to the church body, growing them. And as they go about their daily lives, that's infiltrating Smyrna and surrounding areas, and that's changing the society. That's changing hearts, drawing people to Christ.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I would say it is again, I've used it several times, but it's the everyday means of grace. And so some of that is, there's the ordinary means of grace is what God gives us through the church, the gathering of the body, the Lord's celebration sacraments, so on and so forth. Those are for the church. The preaching of the word, I think, is primarily for the church gathered. And I think the everyday means of grace is what happens in their lives as a result of what they've heard and what they've been taught and how they've been in the word.
Yes.
So I would kind of make a distinction between the ordinary means versus the everyday means. The ordinary is what God has said in Scripture, is He kind of commands in Scripture for the church to do as a means to see everyday means of grace be fruitful out of people's lives,
Yeah.
And that may be a false distinction, but it's just something that helps me.
Yeah. Yep. Do you have certain theological truths, or maybe even viewpoints, we could say, that are particularly near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, from an experiential standpoint, understanding sonship has been a big one for me, and knowing that in being a son, a son and daughter of God, being part of His family, and knowing that adoption, vision is so important to me, because just part of that has to do with the fact of how I grew up in a broken home, not having a strong father in my life. Had a stepdad who was, we piecemealed father figures in my life, and it was men of God who took on the role of responsibility of loving me and mentoring me, and sometimes that was, piecemealed together as well. And so for me, really linking into the sonship, my sonship in Christ, through Christ, the elder brother securing my being my adoption, just really speaks a lot to me. I'd say I probably spent a lot of time there, because if from my own areas where I've had to grow and seek help and counseling and whatever else, it tends to be that's an area that I have to really hold on to quite firmly.
Yeah. Well, that sonship thing, isn't that real clear? And is it Galatians or Romans? Galatians.
Yeah.
In chapter 4, this really landed on me a couple years ago. It says, I mean that the heir, as long as he's a child, is no different from a slave, though he's the owner of everything, but he's under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. And then it says, in the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of this world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. What landed on me, though, is this analogy of an heir, because an heir is an heir. Like you see this in movies and stuff all the time. Like these heirs are basically brats. You know, they're silly boys or whatever, but they're the heir.
Right.
They're the rightful heir.
Right.
And when the time has come, they rule.
Right.
And it seems to me that speaking of as a kid or as a before we were even right with God, it was destined that we would be right with God. We're almost I won't say we were an heir already, but this idea that it's the firmness, the finality of it, the fact that we are an heir of God. I mean, this idea of a son of God, or put in, I think in even better terms, like adoption. I mean, that's amazing. We are adopted sons of God.
Yeah. And I think just because, I think that's probably a note that a lot of men are struggling with, in terms of, because I think there's been they may have had good dads in their life or whatever else, but I think a lot of men struggle with that because their value and worth has been somehow or another defined by the absence of their dad in their life or something like that. And so there's this longing to know that there's this good Father in heaven who has provided for them, and not only provided for them, who is championing them. And whatever else. And I think there's a sense in which we get that from Romans 8 as well. That gives us that kind of picture. And for me, that's always been an area that I hunger for that. And that's where and maybe sometimes to a default, I'll spend time, staying there. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that's particularly prevalent today with grown men, even grown men in the Christian faith, that are maybe missing a dad figure or have some challenges there or some bad history there or some wounds there or whatever term that makes understanding the sonship of God particularly important in this day and age?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I see it, and again, you can look at a lot of contributing factors. You got, divorce, rampant divorce, both inside and outside of the church. You have a culture that tends to devalue masculinity, biblical masculinity, not necessarily, Victorian masculinity, but masculine in terms of manhood and the value of it. They tend to kind of downplay that. And so I think that all of that tends to really strike a blow at the psyche of a man at a certain point. And then when you have that, and then, growing up, I lived with my mom most of my time. She did a wonderful job providing for me and my brother, but it was a strong mother, female figure. My stepdad was not quite as strong, and he a lot of times just kind of deferred to her on some things. And my dad was absent. He was the guy who just didn't want to have responsibility for anything, but he was still in my life. And so just using my own example, I think that a lot of men find some sense of that in their own life, where they just don't know what it really means to be men. And I think sonship speaks to what manhood is. And listen, the sonship is also an all-inclusive term where it would include the daughters, of course.
Yep.
So there's that theology of sonship.
Yep.
And so women are included. So I would say there's probably something equally as important there. But I do think, since we're talking about sociologically, talking about men, I do believe that's a real big issue among the men that I've been in contact with and been pastoring for the last 20 years or so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe particularly in a urban setting too.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
What do you think? So I was raised by a single mom. My dad died when I was 10. My mom raised us, and she got remarried in 2012. But at that point, pretty much everyone's out of the house.
Right.
How have you experienced maybe a shortcoming or a missing, or like how would you say being raised by you could say maybe a strong woman or a dominant woman, even maybe as a single mom, or even if it was a mother who tends to kind of be a little bit more strong in the relationship, even if the father is present, how might that affect someone? How should someone,
Oh wow,
maybe particularly a young boy who being raised in that type of environment, how might that affect him? What might he want to look out for?
Oh gosh, then man, man, I could. There's a lot of different paths we could chase down on that one. I'll only speak just from my own experience because I really don't ever want to. I think every experience is going to be going to inform us a little bit differently. In my experience, it was more of confidence and trusting that not all manhood is toxic, which tends to be some of the message we get. And so therefore sometimes strong women, like you can still value, and my wife's an extremely strong woman. I mean, my gosh, she's a strong woman. She can handle her own. She don't need me in the picture. That's just the reality of it all. But the fact is I'm married to someone because I love her and I love who she is. But at the same time, growing up in a single parent home for the most part, except for my stepdad being in that picture, and he largely didn't take on some of that role of father in my life. I just struggled with confidence. I struggled with confidence. I still do. I mean, frankly, I do. And I think there's areas in which, so I think that probably an area that I would probably zero in on is, when I've done a good amount of counseling and whatever else, and I tend to listen for some of the things like that because those are things that kind of shape our narrative. It shapes who we are. And we don't know it. It's not like necessarily the mom did anything wrong or any of that kind of stuff. It just means, and sometimes they did, sure, but that doesn't mean it's always the case.
Yes.
It just means that those were just narratives that made us kind of shape who we, our confidence in who we are. And and I think, listen, if it's not that, it'll be something else that does it too.
Right.
So,
Yeah. But environment matters. It does. Like it does shape you. It does shape people.
Right.
It's I think often like there's some people I think would have a poor view of poor people or people in a housing project.
Right.
Dude, the fact that here's the thing. If I had grown up in some of those circumstances, dude, I'd still be there. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Like our environment, upbringing, friends, family, our community, what we know to be true around us has a massive impact on us.
Right.
Even all that other stuff aside, like just the atmosphere, it does have an impact. And what's great about that though is the gospel still transforms.
That's right.
And you're still just as much a son of God as anyone else.
Right. And I think as you and even yesterday we preached from Ephesians 3:14-21, and Paul's praying that we be strengthened in our inner being by the Holy Spirit so that we remember that where Christ indwells us by faith. Mm-hmm. And so Paul starts there. Well, actually starts earlier than that, and he says, I bow my knee before the Father. He starts in these places because he has the confidence that his sonship is certain. Mm-hmm. Like he's moved in. That dwelling place of Christ is a strong word that's basically gives us the picture that this is permanent dwelling. Mm-hmm. So our sonship is permanent.
Yes.
And I can't think of another part of my life that's permanent. I mean,
exactly.
You know what I mean? I mean, like it seems like now everything, there's a lack of permanence in everything, marriage and everything. Now, of course, my wife, our marriage, like it's till death do you part. Mm-hmm. But the world would have you say, and there doesn't seem to be any assurance in that from my side of the aisle. Mm-hmm. But our sonship, knowing that that's permanent gives me much more permanence in other areas of my life.
Yes, that's a great point. So, that permanence, that foundational foreverness, that was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
Because man, if you had eternal life for a season mm-hmm. and then you didn't, by definition, you didn't have eternal life.
Right.
Whatever that was, it wasn't eternal. You know what I mean?
That's right.
How do you find preaching? Do you ever preach a sermon and then just like inwardly when it's all over or whatever, and you're sitting there and you just think to yourself, "Oh, that was awesome! Like that was actually decent," and then the response falls flat. Yeah. And then other times you preach a sermon, you're like, "Oh man, that really sucked." And the response is actually like positive. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I think it happens quite often. I think it does seem to me that the sermons that I feel the least confident about are the ones that I tend to get the most feedback from, positive feedback. And the ones I feel like I'm like, oh man, I feel like I nailed that one.
Right.
You know, I mean, just arrogantly, I feel like I nailed that one. You're like, oh, I've got really nothing. And you're like, okay. So I know one thing: I am not the measure of good. Like, I can't be the measure of what's what the Holy Spirit wants to do in my life and in other people's lives. So there is a sense of humility. Like God uses preaching to humble pastors, because you're like, I have no earthly idea what's going to land on people and what's not, other than just open the word, be as faithful as I know how to be faithful to it, and then trust that he's going to do what he wants to do through it.
Yeah. So. Yep. Do you have you had, or do you have ever young men in your church, or maybe not even young men, just guys in your church that might feel called to ministry, and how would you kind of coach someone or counsel someone or kind of walk someone through a fellow that might be wondering if he's supposed to be preaching or not?
Well, I would think, first of all, we've been through some of this already with our elders and most of these guys. Part of it is just letting those guys, warts and all, preach and learn how to preach, and you don't really learn how to preach until you start preaching. So that's just kind of our philosophy.
Oh, so you're okay. So you're looping your elders in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're not preaching every single Sunday.
Oh no,
gotcha.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I still preach 35 to 40 weeks a year.
Okay.
In most cases, but I mean, I still try to take a good amount of that off and put it on those guys, and frankly, try to give some young green guys every once in a while an opportunity to preach, and
I see.
Give them some, and tell them, like, if you're like, I mean, my worship leader is he's one of our deacons and has thought about a ministry and maybe even vocational ministry at some point, or he's bivocational, and we don't really know what's kind of undefined as far as where that will go for him at this point. But he preaches, got good charisma, and whatever else. But I've also, he knows that we're going to sit down and talk after it's over with. Okay, so what do you think about that? And we'll talk honestly about, okay, did people see Jesus, or did they see your story? Did they see, things like that? And I'm really big on asking those hard questions. And I don't necessarily do that with my elders, because they're a little bit older, and we kind of walk together, and I try to incorporate as much as possible. Hey guys, this is the direction I'm going this week. What do you think? And the beautiful thing right now, we're preaching through the book of Ephesians. Well, we did something kind of experimental. Providence, our sending church, decided to do Ephesians at the same time.
Oh, cool.
So me and Joe do our sermon prep, at least. Well, we don't do it all together, but we usually get on together on Tuesdays, do a Zoom call right now, and put the whiteboards up behind us and map out everything and to see what we come up with. And it helps us. You get a lot more done the quicker when you have more eyes on the text.
Okay.
I like that team preaching or team sermon prep
Fascinating.
approach. And so we haven't been able to do that as much with my other elders, because they're obviously non-vocational and they have full-time jobs and families. But we would love to see more of that happen, and involving younger guys who feel like called to preach and be a part of seeing this happen on a week-to-week basis. And then when the time comes, they can begin to get them. And frankly, you said something about Sunday night, and where we are not going there yet, but I could totally be convinced of going back to a Sunday night service, because I think that's if you look about how many great preachers and how many great pastors came out from churches where they were able to just cut their teeth live on Sunday night services. We just don't have those mediums, and it's hard to give up your pulpit a lot on Sunday mornings, because your people really do want your leadership. They do, and not because I necessarily feel like I have to be there, but they want that. So you don't want to. I just can't get to the place where I'm going to give up 20 weeks a year.
Yes.
But having a Sunday night service really opens up a lot of avenues to train up preachers.
Do a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night or a Thursday night. Don't do Sunday night.
Right, whatever. I'm open to whatever. I think out in the burbs, and I kind of classify Smyrna as the burbs, and my family's we're big soccer people. My kids play soccer, play travel soccer. We just seem to be very busy during the week, and I think that seems to be the case for most of my families. Like, if my families are going to do something, which is weird, they'd be more apt to do Sunday night than they would probably Wednesday.
Okay.
I think that's another reason why community groups were difficult for us, because I didn't want my people feeling like they had to, like, they could get together for community group, but being a part of a women's group is easier because dad can still take kids to practice.
Totally. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
Whereas a community group may say you had to shut everything down, and you might have some things like for us, I have 3 boys who play travel, and 1 plays in Murfreesboro, 2 play in Smyrna, and we have practices at Lord knows where we're going to be on any given night. And so for us, I'm not necessarily everything comes through what my experience is, but a lot of people have similar experiences.
Yes.
we just felt like, man, I want my people to be available, present where they were.
Yes.
And again, that might change. Seasons change.
Right. So. That makes total sense. Right. And I believe Dever, Capitol Hill Baptist Church in D.C., does have a Sunday night service. If I'm not mistaken, right? Does that sound about right?
He does. Yeah.
And he seems to be able to do just old school stuff very well when it works. But man, I would need some time to adjust to a Sunday night service. Let's put it that way.
I would too. And I've told the guys, and I've flirted with the idea of just like, I float out there and kind of see how they respond to it. Yeah, I could be talked into this and see if anyone responds, and like no one responds. Like, okay, that's not going anywhere right now.
Yeah,
we'll
like I prefer a Saturday morning service, honestly. Like a Saturday morning service or...
Right.
But there's something about, maybe it just harkens back to childhood. Something about like you go to church, you come home, and going back to church again on the same day.
Right.
This seems like a lot, but a lot
some
of people do it.
Some of that too is, I wouldn't call myself a strict Sabbatarian, but there is a part of me that goes, man, those were the days. Like you just knew what to expect, and that's what the church did. And there wasn't a lot of things competing for it. Now my kids play soccer most every Sunday afternoon after church. So we get out of church. Oh yeah, their main matches are usually Sunday afternoons.
Oh no way.
So like we'll leave church now. Again, all those folks who might want to judge me, go ahead and judge me. You can email me if you want to talk about it. But my wife and I will leave right after church, and she's taking one child to one field, and I'm taking one to another field. And Sunday afternoons are quite chaotic for us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's always my most ideal situation. But Saturdays are typically a little more open for us. But but for us it is, we've kind of said, I can totally be talked into being much more strict about it, but we're not going to be.
Right.
At least not for this foreseeable future.
Yeah. How many kids do you have?
3.
3 kids. What are their ages?
Caleb is 13. Asher will be 11 actually in May 1st in a few days. And my youngest is Judson, and he is 8.
Oh, 3 boys, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That sounds like a handful.
They're amazing.
They all play soccer?
They all play travel soccer, yeah.
Wow. Where'd that come from? The soccer thing?
Random, because I would have never seen this in a million years. I'm a football, basketball guy.
Yeah.
My oldest son just started playing travel soccer. played rec soccer in Nolensville.
Interesting.
And then we just kept going, and next thing we know, like one year we're like, well, they kind of got into the place where they really weren't going to grow from rec.
Okay.
And so we said, I wanted to be that judgmental guy about travel sports, but I couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
So, and so we went in, and
it's a little different when it cuts so close to home, right?
So we took him out for practices, and we talked to the coach, and the coach was like, yeah, here's what you should expect. But, we have a large enough team, so if you miss some Sundays here and there, it's fine. And we kind of said, outside of a couple Sundays a year, a couple Sundays in the fall, a couple Sundays in the spring, like we're not going to have our kids be missing a lot of church, which is not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And we told our boys up front, like, you're probably going to have a lot of families on there that they don't care about missing church, or even don't even go to church at all, and it's not even part of their whole vocabulary. Mm-hmm. For us, it is, you may have to miss out on the weekend tournament, because mom and dad aren't going to take you to Atlanta, because we're just not going to spend, one, we're not going to spend that kind of money. We don't have it. But 2 is, so there's been more freedom in this. But we've been fortunate to have some really good coaches and understanding coaches who haven't pushed the pedal so hard that it's like the kids are consumed by it.
Yeah.
And that usually happens when they're a little older, but so far we haven't had that.
When they're playing travel soccer like that, it's like a game a week when you're in season, I assume. Then how many practices?
So 2 to 3 each. So
2 to 3 practices.
So
each,
my middle
plus
son
a
has,
game.
Yeah, my middle son has a Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday typically. My 2, my youngest and my oldest have 2 practices, and they're usually between an hour and a half to 2 hours in each practice.
Holy cow!
Yeah, and then and there's 2 matches each on Sundays. So they play 2 matches on Sundays, because they're usually about an hour each, and so they'll have a little space in the practice. Now, my oldest son now plays full field, and plays what you call 11v11. So they only have 1 match, but it's an hour and a half match.
I see.
So it's his is different now, because he's now moved into the full scale arena.
Yeah.
But typically it's been like my 2 youngest have 2 matches each Sunday afternoon. And then sometimes they have tournaments, but we try to margin that. We try to make sure that, obviously I got to preach, so I can't be missing and whatever on Sunday mornings. And my elders, and one of my elders actually has kids who do the same thing. And so we're very generous about making sure we walk. If I have to rush out really quick, then they'll make sure they get guests. But that's usually rare. I usually try to tell people, like, I tell the coaches, like, if we're going to be late, we'll make it there. We'll make it. And sometimes we have to go to Hendersonville and go to Southern Kentucky and on Sunday afternoon come back. And
whoa,
dude, it's quite involved. Yeah.
Do you have what sounds to me like you have a pretty decent mind distraction then on a Sunday afternoon? Do you fall into sort of almost a low on a Sunday afternoon or a Monday?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sunday afternoon, my tendency would be go home. I hate to say this, sometimes I gotta be careful. I'll be a little grouchy, so I'll be like,
I could totally see that, man.
Go home, eat lunch, and I'm like, and we had before when they don't have any tournament. If you don't have any games, it's like, hey, we have a quiet time for a couple hours. Do what you want to do. You can go outside and play. You can go in your room, but mom and dad gonna lock up in the bonus room, and I'm gonna take a nap for a little while, and then I'll be all ready, man. In the afternoon, I'll be all yours, man. But so there is a little bit of that, but I would say that's probably more tired than I am necessarily. So, and there is a little bit of a like, oh my gosh, that's over with, and you kind of because you build everything up for that moment,
right?
But I will say this: soccer has been a kind of a nice way. Like, there's nothing like walking out there after you've preached a sermon and you're walking out there with one of your sons, and you put your chair down. It's a nice day. You're just breathing in the air, and you're watching your son play soccer. Like, I mean, whatever people want to say about that, like to me, that is one of the best respites and best Sabbaths I'm gonna get out of that moment. And so,
no, I could see that.
Yeah, so it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what else? What else, Tom?
We've covered a lot today, man.
We have covered a lot.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, man. This has been so much fun, and really have enjoyed getting to know you and talking about a wide variety of things. So really have enjoyed this.
Likewise, absolutely. Anything you'd want to leave with the listeners in closing?
Other than just, man, I want anyone who is of the same ilk or maybe even has some similar convictions. I just want to pray for the church during these days, the church at large, and especially, I'm assuming most of your people listen are probably more local, but just praying for the city of Nashville and the larger area here that particularly we live in an area where churches can be very much performance driven. Just praying that this will be a time when God will just kind of open up the winds. And like you said earlier, I really hope that this is not so much about evacuating churches or we just send people packing, but that it would just, something will quicken in people's hearts to say, man, I know I've gotten used to kind of the experience, but there's something missing. And maybe that just draws people back in droves to the church. And through this, we see an unintended revival through this COVID-19.
Right. Yes. So, amen. Tom, thanks for being on the podcast.
Man, it's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Right.